Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this City Council meeting to order, this regular meeting of the Durham City Council at 7 o'clock on November the 2nd, 2020. Certainly want to welcome everyone here today. Council members are jumping on now. We just finished a closed session of the council, and technology made it a little difficult to jump between one meeting and the next, but colleagues are getting on as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it'll pop in. There's a 60-second flag.
And again, I certainly want to welcome everyone who is here with us tonight. Now, as we settle in for a big day of national importance tomorrow, I ask that you all join me in a moment of silence as we think about all the important things in our nation and in our city at this time. Thank you. Councilmember Reese, will you please lead us in the pledge to the flag? You're muted, Councilmember.
You'll give me a moment to turn my microphone on. Yeah, hi, everybody. I want to thank you, Mr. Mayor, my colleagues, city staff, and Durham City residents who are watching this meeting. I will now change my background, and I said I'll now change my background and recite the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schewel.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Here.
Councilmember Caballero.
Here.
Councilmember Freelon.
Here.
Councilmember Freeman.
Present.
Councilmember Middleton.
Here.
Councilmember Reese.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, we have one ceremonial item tonight, and this is a proclamation to honor MaryAnn Black. Many of you all, like I was, were friends with MaryAnn, as well as having worked with her, many of us over a long period of time for the betterment of our community in so many ways. Not just through her legislative service, but through her many, many years of service at Duke University Health Systems, and also as a county commissioner for many years. And we are all grateful to MaryAnn for the tremendous service that she has offered to our community. Before I read the proclamation, Madam Clerk, is there someone here to receive this proclamation?
Checking, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, Jonathan Black is here.
Great. All righty. Can we please, can we make Mr. Black able to be seen and heard? Great. Welcome. We're glad to have you. I'm going to read the proclamation, and then if you would like to make a brief remarks, we're happy to have you. Whereas a compassionate advocate for the people of Durham, the Honorable MaryAnn E. Black, MSW, LCSW, devoted her life to improving the lives of children and families through access to education, employment, and health care. And whereas for more than 30 years, she provided psychotherapy services to children and their families as an accomplished clinical social worker who served in private practice. In 1994, she was named Social Worker of the Year by the state of North Carolina, and later the same year by the National Association of Social Workers. And whereas in 1990, to increase her advocacy on behalf of children and families, she began her first term as Durham County Commissioner, serving as the chair of the Durham County Commissioners from 1996 to 2002. In her role as chair, she honored the legacy of Durham County General Hospital by guiding the creation of the Duke Regional Hospital with its commitment to serving our growing community. And whereas in 2002, she was chosen to serve as Associate Vice President for Community Relations for the Duke University Health System. And in that year, helped create and implement the annual Durham Health Summit, which engages community members in collaborative efforts to improve health outcomes and access to important healthcare services. This led to the development of the principles of community engagement in 2005, and in 2008, the creation of Project Access of Durham County, where people with no insurance gained access to specialty care. And whereas in 2011, she led the reopening of the City of Medicine Academy on the Duke Regional Hospital campus, which has educated and trained hundreds of Durham students to work in the field of health services and medical care. And whereas in 2017, she was appointed to the North Carolina General Assembly as a member of the House of Representatives, where she faithfully served the citizens of District 29 with honor and distinction, working on key committees including aging, appropriations, health, and human services. Now, therefore, I, Stephen M. Schewel, Mayor of the City of Durham, North Carolina, do hereby honor the calming strength, wisdom, and grace, and can I also add warmth? She was such a warm person, of MaryAnn Black and her commitment to improve the lives of the children and families of Durham through access to education, employment, and high-quality health care. I urge all residents to join in reflecting on the life and legacy of the Honorable MaryAnn E. Black, MSW, LCSW. Witness my hand, this the second day of November, 2020. So let's all please applaud and give thanks for the life and legacy of MaryAnn E. Black. And now, Jonathan Black. Mr. Black, we're glad to have you. Welcome, and we'd appreciate if you have some comments to make.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Durham City Council and Mayor Schewel for honoring my mother, MaryAnn Black. My mother loved Durham, North Carolina. She loved watching this community thrive with new businesses, diverse people, and coming to live here. She was also excited. She also was excited to attend live musicals at the DPAC. She also loved helping people. Many times, my mother would say, "It's about helping people." She understood the importance of health insurance, education, and many topics that Americans are going to vote for or are already voted for tomorrow. I would like to tell people to vote if they have not yet. My mother believed that voting can bring about change. So if you haven't voted, please vote tomorrow. Thank you again, Mayor Schewel and the Durham City Council for honoring my mother, MaryAnn Black.
Thank you so much, Mr. Black. We appreciate you. You are the beneficiary of an incredible legacy. Thank you for being with us tonight, and as we honor your mother and everything that she stood for. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, after that wonderful ceremonial item, we'll now move to announcements by members of the council. Councilmember Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening again, colleagues. Sorry, that was surprisingly emotional for me. Representative Black was a friend and a mentor and my representative in the General Assembly, and someone whose contributions to our community are really difficult to measure. But I want to jump off what Mr. Black mentioned about voting. Tomorrow is Election Day here in Durham. You know, we have elections every year in Durham in November. In the odd numbered years, our local elections take center stage. But next year is a tomorrow, is a presidential election day. We're also electing all of the officers in our Council of State. That's Governor, Lieutenant Governor, Attorney General, every member of the North Carolina General Assembly, 120 House members, 50 state senators, all 13 members of our House delegation to the U.S. Congress, a U.S. Senate seat, and tons of state judges, and of course county commissioners. The choices before voters tomorrow are considerable and important. And the amazing thing I want to tell you is that so many Durham voters have already made their way to the polls, whether it was 2 weeks of early voting or a lot of folks did. What our family did was we requested our absentee ballots by mail and then turned them in at the Board of Elections. Mr. Mayor, there are about 244,000 registered voters in Durham County. Fully 2/3 of those voters have already cast their ballots in this election, which is astonishing. But that means that somewhere in the neighborhood of 80,000 registered voters here in Durham have not yet cast their ballots. And so I'm hoping that all of them are listening tonight, or at least some of them are listening tonight. And I hope that if you are, and you have not yet cast your ballot, that you will make a plan right now, figure out where you need to go, what time you're going to go, how you're going to do that, and then commit when you wake up in the morning to executing that plan to vote. You know, decisions are made by the people that show up. And so often these elections come and go and people don't really see the importance in their lives. But nothing could be more important than the election we're facing now and the choice we're facing, both here in North Carolina and across the country. So I wanted to give folks a little information for those 80,000 folks who have yet to vote, who are registered. You can go to decovotes.com. That's DCOvotes.com. That's the website for the Durham County Board of Elections. You can have all the information you need to find your polling place, hours, locations, the information that you need to go and cast your vote and make your voice heard. There are lots of ways to get to the polls this year. Our Go Durham bus system was fare free for the 2 weeks of early voting that just ended this past Saturday and is again free tomorrow. If folks want to figure out how to use Go Durham to get to their polling place, they should go to waytogodurham.com/go vote, which has all the information you need to plan your trip on Go Durham to get to your precinct polling place. And so there's also an organization called DurhamRides.com that is helping provide free rides to folks who maybe don't have access to public transportation or would just rather take a ride with those folks. And I know some of the volunteers in that program, they use really good PPE and safety protocols to make sure that this is done safely during this pandemic. So just wanted to mention that. First of all, Mr. Mayor, that tomorrow's election day, hope the 80,000 voters in Durham who have not made their way to the polls plan to do that tomorrow and make your voice heard. The second thing I wanted to say is related to that, and that is to talk just briefly about one of the real MVPs of the pandemic here in the city of Durham, and that is our Go Durham bus service. As we all know, our bus service is different from a lot of other cities in this area because our bus service is a absolutely critical lifeline to working families here in Durham. And our bus service and especially our transit employees have gone so far above and beyond the call of duty during this time to keep that service running. You saw in other cities around the country and in the area significant drop-offs in transit ridership during the pandemic. In Durham, you saw some reduction, but not a ton. And that's because folks need it to get to work who are essential employees. And so those essential workers continue to use our Go Durham bus service throughout the pandemic. They're continuing to use it now. The other thing I wanted to mention about Go Durham is I think about a month and a half ago, they started offering face masks on the buses. And I have learned today that during that time, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000 face coverings have been distributed on Go Durham buses by Go Durham. And I think that's just tremendous. It just builds on some of the other work that community members have done to get our bus riders on the buses safely with appropriate face masks. So thank you, Go Durham, especially our operators and all the staff who have made Go Durham work during this difficult time. The last thing I wanted to mention, Mr. Mayor, speaking of MVPs during the pandemic, is Durham Parks and Rec. I received an email last week from Phil Holmes, who is the president of South Durham Little League. South Durham Little League has about 450 kids who provide baseball and softball programming to kids in the southern half of Durham and surrounding areas. They just finished their 2020 season, a season that they weren't sure would happen. And at the conclusion of the season, the president of South Durham Little League, Phil Holmes, sent a letter or sent an email to Durham Parks and Rec and was kind enough to copy me. He said, "I'm writing today to let you know that our 2020 season would not have been possible, or at the very least would not have been as successful without two specific Durham Parks and Recreation employees." And Mr. Holmes specifically named Tammy Brown and Kathy Reagan, who have been incredibly responsive and supportive in South Durham Little League's efforts this year to field a season that, again, Mr. Holmes said he wasn't sure would ever happen. Some of the city facilities they used were Herndon, Southern Boundaries, Crest Street, Wrightwood, and Lyon Park. They used baseball facilities at all those areas, and obviously city employees were responsible for maintenance and making sure that those fields were up to par. And he was just really, really impressed. And I didn't want to let that email go by without sharing that with my colleagues and the folks here who are watching. So many thanks to Durham Parks and Rec for their outstanding service, especially during this difficult time. Mr. Mayor, that's plenty of announcements. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Are there other announcements by members of the council? Councilmember Freelon.
Hey, first I wanted to echo, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to echo Councilmember Reese's remarks about MaryAnn Black, and I can see that Jonathan Black is still on with us. If you can hear me, brother, your mom was such an important figure in my family's life, and particularly she was close friends with my parents, but also was instrumental in helping council members of my own family through some really difficult times. So that was also a very emotional reflection on her legacy. And as someone who's recently lost a parent, and gained an ancestor, I feel, a mix of sorrow that she's not here with us anymore, but also great pride in the legacy she's left behind in the city of Durham. So thank you again to Miss Ancestor MaryAnn Black, the Honorable. I just want to give a little kind of report back about, something that I'll probably be talking about every week until we see the crime go down in Durham. The shootings haven't stopped. And I haven't stopped kind of working, again, going back to that email I got several weeks ago. What are you doing every day? I ask myself every day what I'm doing to address violence in Durham. And I was really excited last week to receive a proposal for the We Are the Ones Fund, which we'll discuss next week at the Durham City Council meeting. I've been talking, and again, this is just for accountability for the members of Durham who I want to know that we take the issue of violence in Durham very seriously and, literally doing everything we can to move at lightning speed towards addressing the issue and getting some solutions in front of council that we can vote on that are going to address the rise of violence that we've seen. And so, I've been in contact with Minister Paul Scott, who wrote a really powerful article, the Black Liberation Action Committee, the Durham Committee on the Affairs of Black People, Spirit House. Today I spoke with my former colleagues on the Human Relations Commission and countless other community organizers. We've been doing canvases, talking to people about what they think they need to be safe. And those efforts will continue. Because we want to hear from you. So please, this is echoing something Brother Middleton has said in the past, please use your voices, hit us up over email, let us know what you think needs to happen. It's so important and so vital that we hear from you as we consider different options to address violence in Durham. But just wanted to follow up specifically to that issue and let you know that it's something we discussed last work session with the violence interrupter, and it'll come up again at next week's work session. So shout out to everyone who's taken time, small businesses, Sweet Smoothies, Black Men Build, No Cap, Muffin, Mama Nia, Alexis, Dr. Alexis Pauline Gums, everybody who I've been in communication with. I just appreciate your feedback and would like more of it. So that's it. Just wanted to share that we're still working behind the scenes. You may not see between the meetings what work is going in, but we are working. We do care, and we want more feedback. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Are there other announcements by members of the council? Councilmember Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening again, folks, to all of my colleagues and everyone watching. former President Clinton once said of Nelson Mandela that when he walked in a room, he made you want to stand up taller. And there are just certain people that have that effect when they're in the room. MaryAnn Black was one of those people. Although small in stature, when she was in the room, she made you just want to be better and stand up a little taller. So we honor her memory and her legacy tonight. It was a beautiful memory and proclamation on her part, Mr. Mayor, and to her son, her great son. Thank you for being here to receive it. We bid her hail and farewell. May her memory be a blessing. Mr. Mayor, so tomorrow the world really will be focused on what is arguably the world's only remaining superpower, what we will do in terms of choosing leadership of this nation. But I'm reminded that all politics is local. Also, while many of us are caught up with the presidential election, we still have issues going on here locally, and Councilor Freeland has already alluded to it, that the gun violence continues in our city. We send our hearts and our concerns out to the family of our elder, the grandmother who was shot in broad daylight just the other day here in Durham. I'm heartened by the presentation we got from Bull City United last week. I think now that we are on the precipice, we are right on the threshold of being able to put in place the first piece of a multifaceted, comprehensive, tactical, right now response to gun violence in our city. I'm grateful that the staff expedited that presentation, and I know they're working on it, but I hope in very short order we will have something actionable, whether it's going to be actually muscularizing what the county is doing with money or deciding we're going to launch our own initiative in the city. But I think that we should make it of utmost importance to translate what we heard last week into a week before last into something actionable and give us something that we can actually point at, that is tangible, that is an actual policy that speaks to right now. I think one of the perils of right now, colleagues, is that whatever we do, whatever we decide to do, is going to be viewed through the prism of a right now response to what is going on. And I think the danger, and well, not danger, but one of the concerns we should have is that, if your kid is drowning, that's not the time to pull out the tablet and start looking for camps that have swimming lessons. If somebody's having a heart attack, that's not the time to talk about, lifestyle changes and eating better and an exercise program. You got to get the kid out the pool. You got to stabilize the heart attack victim. So the issue right now is we should be talking about root causes all the time. So if we reflexively focus on root causes, which we should at this time, but because right now we're in the middle of the emergency, I think we're going to have to be able to point to whatever we do right now and say, this is when we can expect to see this initiative impact the numbers, whether that's a year, a week, 6 months, 6 years, because we're doing it while the emergency is going on, as opposed to doing it all the time. And I think that's going to be a fair question, and I think that's going to be a fair metric that we've got to be able to articulate and defend to the people of this city, particularly if we're going to start throwing money around. When can we expect this initiative to address what's going on right now, and at the same time address strategic long-term concerns? I think the violence interrupter program is something that there's obviously a lot of agreement on. I know there's divergent views on other initiatives, but I think this is the first salvo that we can fire, the first concrete thing that we can do post haste to address the violence in the short term, in the immediate sense. And then I think we need to quickly pivot to the type of wraparound services that violence interruption requires, whether it's a UBI, universal basic income, whether it's some other type of initiative. But I think for the right now, and I don't think we need to wait for the next budgetary cycle either. I think we need to act mid-cycle in doing something that will convey confidence and convey solidarity with the people of our city, convey a concern to the most vulnerable folk who, really aren't going to be worried too much about who's president. They want to know, can their kids go outside and play? Will they have to jump in the bathtub tonight? So I want to, again, just reiterate the importance of beginning to put ourselves in a position as a government to point to concrete policy actions and interventions that we're taking as a government that are not just aimed at future generations, but that we can say, we believe that this will help us not only in the long term, but in the short term as well, because it is upon us now. The game is afoot. The emergency is going on right now. We got to get the kid out the pool, and we got to stabilize the heart attack victim. And then we can talk lifestyle changes and look for camps for swimming programs. So thank you all for that. I look forward to all of us putting our collective will and creativity together to address this scourge that is upon our city. Big day tomorrow. May God bless our country. May God bless our city. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Are there any further announcements? All right. I appreciate I'm sorry, Councilmember Caballero.
Yeah, Councilmember Freeman can go next. I think she actually had her hand up before me.
I saw you first, and that's the way I do it, so go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Okay, mine is very different than what we've been talking about, so it's going to be
No
a
problem.
different
Go
tone.
ahead.
This is about tomorrow's election and what we're facing. So earlier today, I've been going to the woods more. I've been lucky. The one positive of the pandemic is I've been able to go out and I take my dog. And for me, it's a place where I reflect, and it's a place where I find solace, and a place where I can think quietly instead of having two parents working from home and 3 kids and a dog in a 1,200 square foot house. So the the quiet is needed. And I think these last many months have been really hard for everyone in our city. And I think our physical, mental, and spiritual health has suffered. We know that so many of our residents who were already close to the margin are barely hanging on. And I think many of us are waiting with an existential knot in our stomachs for the outcome of tomorrow's election. And I want to thank all the people in Durham and across our great state for all their get out the vote efforts. I've seen so many incredible organizations and volunteers, and Durham should be really, really proud of its turnout so far. And I know that the outcome of tomorrow's election means the difference of more relief coming, and a different response to this pandemic, and a different response to the terrible economic situation many of us are facing this winter. And I've said this before, it's been really hard for me to maintain my hope. And I've been listening to a lot of Dylan and Victor Jara and others to remind me that this fight for a liberated, more just world is not new. We have fought fascists and we have fought white supremacists before. And we must continue fighting regardless of tomorrow's outcome. This week, I've been reminded in a really painful way why it's important to fight for the world and for our lives. My tío Domingo in Santiago has been intubated and in a medically induced coma in Santiago since October 25th due to COVID. He turned 75 in September, and though he's definitely in the later arc of his life, he's fighting like hell. He has a grandkid on the way and family praying and waiting for him not to let go yet. And on the same day he was intubated, in Chile, there was a plebiscite or a referendum to vote on a new constitution. And the Chileans overwhelmingly, 78% of Chileans voted for a new constitution. The current constitution currently in place was brought in by Pinochet and is not a fair reflection of what democracy should be. And I think if you asked my uncle if he would ever see that day, he would have said no. Like many Chileans, he's lived through a lot. He worked for the Allende government in the 70s. He was detained and interrogated, and luckily my grandmother, he was not tortured. My grandmother heard that he'd been detained, was able to pull a lot of strings and get him out, and he was one of the lucky ones. He left Chile in 1974, was able to go back in 1984, a decade later, but was blacklisted from being an attorney and from practicing law until many decades later. So he was able to return to his profession, but not until he was a much older man. And so these are the things that I am sitting with before tomorrow. I think so many of us have family, and we come from folk who have lived and survived so much. And we must always keep the faith and imagine the world we want in our minds and our spirits. And so whatever happens after tomorrow, I'll see you in the streets, Durham, and hopefully it will be to celebrate.
Thank you, council member, for that very, very heartfelt and personal statement. And we'll be out there with you. And much gratitude for sharing your story, your family story, with all of us and with our community. Thank you so much. All right, Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate the opportunity to go last or to go after so many of my colleagues have already spoken and shared so much of what I would have talked about. I also want to send my heartfelt support to Councilmember Caballero, acknowledging how difficult it is to watch a family member go through the COVID process. I am deeply moved. And then also just noting, I wanted to also thank Mr. Black for being on the call this evening and acknowledging that a wonderful powerhouse and you know, and Senator, my now ancestor, MaryAnn Black. This evening couldn't be more I can't be more present in this moment and acknowledging just how much we are all going through. And I want to make sure that I take stock and acknowledge that and say to the public, the general public watching and viewing, and to my colleagues as well, that it's important to note that tensions are running really high right now, and it's not going to dissipate after tomorrow. And so just noting that, I just beg you all to be patient and kind to yourselves, acknowledging there's grief and there's grace, and that there's also help. And so just noting that, you know, organizations like the Durham Crisis Response Center or, you know, Alliance Behavioral Health are available, and just noting that there are really good resources here in our community is important to make sure that you're acknowledging when you need to kind of tap out or to just check out, because you have to take care of your mental health. Otherwise it can become mental illness. I do want to also note that I've on many occasions I've thanked folks for using their doing their civic duty and doing protests. And I want to thank the many parents who have shown up at the Durham Police Headquarters for multiple Saturdays and have continued to show up for their Guns Down, Hearts Up rallies. And I just want to note that I see you. I know we all see you, and we're here, and we're all in this together, and we will get through this. I also want to note that it is Black Solidarity Day, and it's important to acknowledge the experience of what folks have seen throughout this year, throughout this pandemic is present, and just acknowledging what happened in Alamance County for just trying to take a moment to acknowledge those 8 minutes and 46 seconds. What came of it with those 2 children being pepper sprayed is unacceptable, and I just it wouldn't be a proper, you know, counsel without noting that and letting folks know we see you and we hear you and we're with you on that. I also just want to share that in this moment, there are lots of decisions to be made, and I just want to make sure that folks are holding up their friends and families and keeping as much as they can close. Because we're getting ready to face some trying times, folks, and I know you're ready, but when you need to, step back and others will step forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Any further announcements? All right, colleagues, thank you for sharing those thoughts with us tonight. We'll now move to priority items. And I'll first ask, are there any priority items by the city manager? Madam Manager, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of the Durham City Council. I do have several priority items for you this evening. Agenda item number 7, 2020 Eno Hall Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. Additional information has been provided in attachment number 4. Agenda item number 19, which is 2020-2021 Multifamily Production and Preservation Requests for Proposals, the Funding Award Recommendations. Additional information has also been provided for this item in attachment number 4. Number 6 is located in the priority items by the city manager, city attorney, and city clerk section of the November 2nd, 2020 City Council meeting agenda. Agenda item number 27, proposed amendment to the Durham City Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF plan. Additional information has been provided in attachment number 5, and attachment number 1 was updated. Item number 21, Z18000013, Chesterfield Avenue street closing, needs to be heard after item number 22, Z18000032, which is 1700 Hillandale Road, due to the relationship of those two items.
Thank you very much, Madam Manager. I had seen that on the agenda, that last item, and we'll absolutely do that. Thank you. All right, Madam Attorney, do you have any priority items for us tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council. It's good to be with you this evening. We do not have any priority items from the City Attorney's Office tonight.
Thank you, Madam Attorney. Madam Clerk, any priority items tonight?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and all the council members. I do have a priority item. The City Clerk's Office had an update to the September 8th, 2020 minutes, and they've been revised as per council's request, and no action is required.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, colleagues, we've now heard the priority items. No action is required, and we're going to move to the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of items that has previously been worked on by the council and can be approved by a single vote of the council. Any council member or member of the public can pull an item from the consent agenda, in which case it will be heard at the end of the meeting. I'll now read the consent agenda. Item 1, approval of City Council minutes. Item 2, Housing Appeals Board, Mayor's nominee. Item 3, Human Relations Commission appointments. Item 4, Mayor's Council for Women appointment. Item 5, year-end 2020 inventory performance audit dated September 2020. Item 6, participatory budgeting PB grant agreement with the LGBTQ Center of Durham, Inc. to provide one-time funding for positions and benefits. Item 7, 2020 Eno Hall Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. Item 8, vehicle lease agreement, Lincoln Community Health Center. Item 9, Celeste Circle and Githen School lift stations, Amendment 1 to the Professional Engineering Services Contract. Item 10, Williams Water Treatment Plant Basin Improvements, Design Contract Award to Hazen and Sawyer. Item 11, award of utility easement survey and delineation service contract to Taylor, Wiseman, and Taylor Incorporated. Item 12, authorized quality assurance contract by Priority Dispatch Corporation. Item 13, bid report September 2020. Item 14, resolution approving an amendment to an installment financing contract. Item 15, property exchange interlocal agreement with the Durham Public Schools Board of Education for Snow Hill Road Park and Lucas Middle School. Item 16, support for the Upper Neuse River Basin Association Interim Alternative Implementation Approach, IAIA. Item 17, Security Operations Center, SOC Managed Services. Item 27, proposed amendment to the Durham City Coronavirus Relief Fund, CRF plan. You have heard the consent agenda, and I'll now accept a motion for its approval.
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved by Councilmember Reese, seconded by Councilmember Caballero. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schul,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero,
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon,
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton,
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it, and the motion passes unanimously. We'll now move to the general business agenda, public hearings. And the first item is item 20, Consolidated Annexation, National Heritage Academies, NHA Oak Charter School. And we'll first, I believe, hear a report from staff. But I'm looking for a staff member to help us with that report.
Yes, sir. Mayor Schul?
Yes.
All right. Mayor Schul, Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, honorable council members, good evening. I'm Alexander Cahill with the Planning Department. I'm happy to be here with you. I do want to state for the record that all Planning Department hearing items have been advertised and noticed in accordance with state and local law, and then affidavits of all notices are available on file in the Planning Department. We received a request for a utility extension agreement, voluntary annexation, and an initial zoning map change. They were received by Bob Dunstan of Charter Development Company for 2 parcels located at 2201 East Gear Street and 2523 East Club Street. These total 12.37 acres. If you remember, this case was continued from the October 5th council session at the applicant's request, and this was to include additional transportation improvements that may be found in the utility extension agreement. This annexation petition is for a non-contiguous expansion of the corporate city limits. However, it is adjacent to an existing satellite annexation. There's also an associated major site plan for a new 1-story, 42,316 square foot K-8 public charter school that will serve 772 students, which is under review, which you can see in attachment 14. A minor special use permitted will also be required for this use, but has not been received at this time. This site is presently zoned residential suburban 20, commercial neighborhood, and residential rural. And if the annexation is approved, staff does recommend an exact translation of the zoning designation. If approved, this request would become effective on December 31st of 2020. City and county operational departments such as solid waste, fire, police, and EMS have reviewed this request and the potential impacts this annexation might have at full build out. And while that's not known at this time, it could result in some reduction in the level of service provided by the police department. The Public Works and Water Management departments have determined that the existing City of Durham water and sanitary sewer do have capacity for the proposed development. And Budget and Management Service Department has determined that the proposed annexation will become revenue positive at build out. Additional information can be found in the staff report. In addition, the applicant has proffered transportation improvements in the UAE. These additional improvements include school zone pavement markings and flashers and sidewalks. And they have impacted the cost benefit analysis that was originally done by the Budget and Management Department, which you find in attachment 5. The anticipated expenses for the city transportation department will have been reduced with the applicant since committing to these transportation improvements. So our recommendation staff does determine that these requests are consistent with the comprehensive plan and applicable policies and ordinances. Staff recommends that the city council does approve the utility extension agreement, voluntary annexation, and consistency statement for the proposed zoning map change. This recommendation is based on the geographic nature of this annexation. While the proposed annexation is non-contiguous to the primary city limits, it's contiguous to a satellite annexation that previously occurred and begins to fill in the city limits of that non-contiguous area. There are 3 motions that are required for this application. The first is to adopt an ordinance annexing the property and entering into a utility extension agreement. The second is to adopt a consistency statement, and the third is for the zoning ordinance. And this time, staff is available for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cahill. You have heard the report from staff, and I'm now going to declare this public hearing open. And I first want to ask if there are any council members who have questions for Mr. Cahill. Are there any questions for staff at this time? All right, hearing none, we'll move to the presentations from members of the public. I see that we have 5 people who have signed up to speak on this item. Let me first ask, just to make sure, Dylan Smith. Dylan Smith, are you planning to speak on this item, or are you here to listen to this item? Want to make sure we're including everybody. Madam Clerk, could you make Dylan Smith available to be heard?
I'm here with Bob Dunstan, and I will be here for questions. I'm the civil engineer.
All right.
About it.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Yep.
All right. I see then that we have 4 people who were signed up to speak, and they are Neil Ghosh, Bob Dunstan, Bill Bryan, and John DeBerry. Just want to make sure again, is there anyone else here who would like to speak on this item? Is there anyone here, an attendee at this meeting, who would like to speak on this item? If you would, you can please put that in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand. But I don't see anybody. Okay. Mr. Ghosh, Madam Clerk, can you make Mr. Ghosh available to be heard?
Mayor Schul, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Mr. Ghosh. Approximately how long will you all need for your presentation?
Maybe 15 minutes?
That will be fine. Thank you. Mr. Ghosh, I'm going to let you, I know you have 4 speakers. I'm going to go ahead and let you manage that time, okay?
All right, that sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And good evening, Mayor Schul, Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, and members of the City Council. My name is Neil Ghosh. I am an attorney with the Morningstar Law Group at 112 West Main Street in Durham. First, I want to thank staff for its presentation of the requested annexation. You all may remember this site better as the old Starlight Drive-In Theater at the corner of East Club and East Gear. As staff mentioned, National Heritage Academies is requesting annexation to gain access to municipal utilities to accommodate a K-8 public charter school for 772 students. From a land use planning standpoint, annexing this area will help the city achieve several long-range goals. The annexation will decrease an existing gap in the city's corporate limits. Moreover, the annexation will be revenue positive and not detrimental to the ability of the city to provide municipal services. While there is no rezoning request associated with this annexation, like most annexations, this request is paired with a utility extension agreement, or UEA. Usually, UEAs are boilerplate agreements. However, through this UEA, NHA voluntarily has committed to a substantial number of off-site road improvements. These road improvements are well in excess of what the city could require of NHA through the typical site plan process. We are committing to them nonetheless because we feel they are important to make a safer road network, not only for the school, but for the community as a whole. We estimate that these road improvements will cost over $1 million to install. Our next speaker, Mr. Bob Dunstan, will go into more detail about these road improvements. Mr. Dunstan is with the National Heritage Academies, and he has been working closely with staff and his consultants to put this plan in front of you tonight. He is proud of what his team has been able to put together and hopes to have your support tonight. Bob?
Thank you, Nell. And good evening, council members. My name is Bob Dunstan, and I'm with National Heritage Academies. We, in partnership with the Oak Charter Academy Board of Directors, National Heritage is the developer and will be the operator of the proposed school site that is the subject of the annexation request before you. As Neil explained, the process or the proposed annexation will provide a valuable benefit to the city of Durham if approved this evening. An approval will provide in round numbers about $1 million worth of improvements and upgrades to the East Club Boulevard and East Gear Street intersection at absolutely no cost to the city of Durham. This investment in public infrastructure is in addition to the school facility itself, which will cost around $12 million to construct, also at no cost to the city of Durham. If staff could pull up, we have a site plan exhibit. If they could pull that up, I know that usually takes a minute or two. I'll kind of move through the next paragraph. By the way, the Club Gear intersection, perfect. We'll need that in just a second, but that's great. The Club Gear intersection suffers from too few lanes and too many turning movements, and from the increasing traffic volumes due to the expanding commercial and residential development in the area. The traffic study that was completed earlier in this year in connection with the proposed development identified several improvements that could help alleviate the traffic pressures in the area, but only about half of those will be required by NCDOT as a condition of the site plan approval. Nevertheless, we recognize the importance of having a robust and safe road network, especially near our schools, and consequently, we have agreed to construct the remaining intersection improvements recommended in the traffic study at our sole expense. Now I can briefly walk you through some of those improvements, if you would, as we refer to the map that we pulled up. Primarily, everything that's in yellow within the two road systems, those are all the improvements we'll be discussing. And those improvements in yellow will be made at no cost to the city of Durham. To start with, the entrance to the school is designed to allow free-flowing traffic to enter from both directions. The one double-lane entrance off of East Gear, as well as two single-lane exits, permitting right turns only, by the way. One of those will be off of Gear near the entrance, and the other one will be on Club. And both of those are designed to keep traffic is a right out only, as I said, and those should also allow traffic to move slowly and smoothly to basically the immediate expressway accesses. The eastbound Club approach will have a left turn lane extended to serve more vehicles. There'll also be a curb slash median, if you would, that will be installed to allow or basically force the existing school traffic exiting out onto East Club to only turn right and head towards I-85. The northbound Gear approach, so coming in from the south, will be widened from one lane to two lanes. And this is important. It'll provide a dedicated left turn lane onto Club and a combined through right lane. Currently, if you look down to the south, those improvements extend, literally they're more than a football field in length all the way down to the south, if you would. Now swinging around to the north side, the southbound Gear approach, as you're approaching from the Walmart area, will be widened from 2 lanes to 3 lanes, providing a dedicated right turn lane onto westbound Club, as well as a dedicated through lane and a dedicated left turn lane onto eastbound Club. The same left turn lane, now if you look from the intersection and moving north up to the Walmart, that turn lane will be extended from the intersection all the way up to the entrance of the school. So that will provide a dedicated left turn lane from Gear directly into the school. And once again, that'll enter into the free-flowing entrance off of East Gear. Lastly, and in addition to the road improvements, National Heritage Academies has also agreed to provide pedestrian sidewalks along the entire frontage of both East Club Boulevard as well as East Gear Street. The sidewalks will help promote the development of a safe pedestrian network, as well as provide safe connectivity to the future developments that are on the books right now. When complete, the entire intersection will serve pedestrians and move vehicles in a significantly better manner than in its existing condition. And this will all occur at no cost to the city of Durham. The commitment to do more than what is required, more than the minimum, is who we are at National Heritage Academies. We are committed to the families that trust us every day with their children's education, and we are committed to responsible development in the communities we serve. From a technical perspective, as Neil pointed out, the voluntary road improvements, which I've just laid out for you, are also included in the executed utility extension agreement accompanying this annexation request, so that our commitments are very explicit. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have, and I respectfully request your approval of this annexation request.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dunstan. I believe Mr. Bryan is next up.
Yes, thank you much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening. My name is Bill Bryan, and I'm an attorney with the Morningstar Law Group, and I'm counsel to the applicant, National Heritage Academies. As you've heard from Mr. Gosh and Mr. Dunstan, and as is confirmed by the staff report, The annexation proposal before you tonight more than meets the objective criteria that the city applies to annexation requests. In exchange for the extension of water and sewer, which will be paid for by National Heritage, the school project will be putting more than $1 million worth of transportation improvements on the ground and substantially improving the quality and quantity of both water and sewer and the transportation infrastructure in this area of the city. Objectively, therefore, this project and the proposed annexation is a very good deal for the people of Durham. But beyond the issue of dollars and cents and infrastructure, this proposal and the project it will enable also will be very good for the city for both economic development and policy reasons. As you all know, I've been involved with the Chamber of Commerce in Durham for over 30 years, serving as chair of the board, among other things. For every one of those 30 years, both the city and the county have sought greater investment in economic development in Northeast Durham. As Neil pointed out, this is the site of the old Starlight Drive-In movie theater, which has been an empty lot for ages. The property that we're talking about is at the intersection of East Club and East Gear Streets, street names that have figured prominently over the years in stories about economic deprivation, disinvestment, and which also have long been community targets for redevelopment and reinvestment. Now, National Heritage is prepared to invest over $12 million in a state-of-the-art school facility, extend water and sewer, and put $1 million worth of road improvements on the ground in this area. National Heritage has a lengthy record of proven success in Durham. It has operated the Research Triangle Academy for over 10 years. What better catalyst for further investment and economic development can there be? With economic development will come job opportunities, expanded educational opportunities, infrastructure and investment, all in East Durham. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly the type of commitment you've been asking for in this part of town for decades. And our client's here to make that commitment. And our client is here to make that commitment to Durham and to East Durham in particular. So for all the objective financial and subjective policy reasons, we urge you to vote to approve this annexation tonight. We very much appreciate your attention, and we will be happy to respond to any questions you may have. However, next, I'm going to introduce Mr. John DeBerry, who's a member of the board of the proposed school and who would like to address you. Mr. DeBerry.
Good evening, Mayor Sewell and council members. Again, my name is John DeBerry, and I'm at 4121 Trotter Ridge, Durham, North Carolina. I've been a resident of Durham for 30 years, and I am passionate about the youth in this community as well as all over the United States. I speak on behalf of everyone here in saying thank you for your leadership and your dedication to Durham. I have long been a volunteer in Durham. I served on the Durham City Small Business Advisory Committee from 2005 to about 2015. I worked with numerous youth organizations, the Durham Business and Professional Change. I worked for several years with their mentoring program they do with the youth. Right now, I serve as the regional director from North Carolina to New York with Full Gospel Businessmen Fellowship International. And we sponsor an event every year where we take anywhere from 45 kids to Fort Caswell down in Oak Island each year. And we do intense training during that time. And we bring the kids back, and of course we mentor them throughout the year. 2021, we're expecting to take 100 youth. We've already got even some kids coming from Ghana, West Africa, that's going to be working with us. And even before the pandemic, I actually was working with the youth jail out on Broad Street. I actually went out there every fourth Saturday for the last couple of years to help mentor and work with the youth. So that just gives you some idea of how passionate I am about being part of the community of Durham and making sure that it remains successful. Tonight, I'm here as a Durham resident and board member of Oak Charter Academy. I respectfully ask that you support the annexation of our school into Durham because it is the right thing for our kids and the future of our community. Our school will be a point of pride in its immediate area, successfully serving the students from all backgrounds. We will work to ensure there are no barriers for any family who wishes to enroll their kids in our school. Our Oak Charter Academy Board is comprised of a team with extensive background in Durham and in education. As noted, I am a Durham resident committed to the success of our community. We've got board members Edna Van. She's a Durham resident, has over 15 years experience with Durham Public Schools, special education teacher, and was an assistant principal. Dr. Derek Sauls is department chair and assistant professor of the Department of Public Health and Exercise Science at St. Augustine University. Dr. Iris Garner spent 7 years as the National Assessment Educational Progress Director with the North Carolina Department of Instruction. Our board chair, Gerald McNair, lived in Durham for many years, and he actually works real close with me with the event we do every year at the men's retreat where we take the youth. So he works real close with me with that. You can see we've got extensive and a lot of knowledge in our board of directors. Our board's goal is to meet children at their learning level and offer them an education that establishes a foundation of success. We will not only aim for them to strive academically, we will also mentor them in the areas of social skills and character. Like Councilman Middleton saying, we want to snatch them out of the pool. We want to snatch them out of the pool immediately as soon as we get going. In that way, we will prepare them to make a meaningful contribution with our community and across our society. By building Oak Charter Academy, we are not only investing in the neighborhood and community infrastructure, we are investing in the future of our kids. I know we would all agree that this is the most important responsibility we hold. In closing, as I listened to the council meeting, Mayor Sewell, when you first started, we was talking about choices. Councilman Reese, choices. Every councilman came on was talking about choices. We make one of the greatest choices we made since we've been alive, tomorrow. All of us have choices. Pulling the kids out of the pool is a choice. All we're asking is that you all support this annexation so that these parents in this community will have a choice. Will have a choice where their kids go and where they're supported. That's all we're asking, to give the parents in that area a choice. Like we're talking about all evening long, and we're investing in the long-term success of the city that we love. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. DeBerry, Mr. Bryan, Mr. Dunstan, and Mr. Ghosh. Appreciate hearing from you all. I'll now ask again, is there anyone else here who would like to be heard on this item before we have questions from the council? Anyone else here? If so, could you put that in the chat or raise your virtual hand? All right, I don't see anyone. Before we get started on the questions, Mr. Bryan, I'm reminded with tomorrow being election day that 4 years ago you were on the hot seat as the chair of our Board of Elections in what was a very controversial and close election. And you did Durham proud as our Board of Elections chair. And I just want to, here we are 4 years later, and I just want to remember that and thank you and appreciate my admiration for the way in which you led the board and our community at that time. All right, colleagues, I'm now going to ask if there are any questions for either staff or the applicant. Councilmember Freeman and then Councilmember Freeline.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the presentation. It filled in a lot of the questions I had. I noticed that there is a waterway on the back side of this property, and I didn't notice any buffer identified on that drawing. And so I just had some questions around that. And then just noting that this area is a hugely county space with, I'm noting that there's the Walmart in that area and then there's something else, but I'm not sure what the plans are in that community. And so I have a few questions around that, acknowledging all of the upgrades that were mentioned in this project for that area, noting there are others. And I'll just let the first question be answered.
I think I can answer that.
This is Alexander. I can jump into the buffer per the UDO requirements would be required at this time of site plan approval.
So what you're saying is there's no buffer right now?
Well, I think what he's saying is that there will be a buffer, council member. When what you've been given is an exhibit that shows primarily, sort of where the building is going to go and where the parking is going to be and the road improvements. Most importantly, we wanted to make sure you could see the road improvements, but it's not a detailed site plan, and I didn't mean to suggest that it was. So. There is a detailed site plan, and on that site plan, I believe you'll find the buffer.
Bill, I can interject there, if you don't mind. Everything shown in blue right now, Councilman Freeman, includes the 50-foot setback buffers.
Then just a note for staff, I'm not sure if we've had the discussion about a plan for this area, but I would like to hear some feedback on a small area plan, noting that this is if it's a non-contiguous city area, then am I hearing that there's some other projects that might be coming forward, or is there not any projects coming forward that would fill in this gap?
Good evening, Councilmember Freeman and other members of council. Sarah Young with the Planning Department. I am not aware, there may be some other site plans in the works in this area. I am not aware of every single site plan that comes through our office personally. However, I can tell you that in terms of small area planning for this area, this is an area that is going to get a more detailed look at through the comprehensive plan. And while we are not doing individual small area plans separately, we are doing them as part of the larger comprehensive plan process. So this is an area that we'll get a closer look at because right now we don't have very much in terms of guidance other than the 2005 future land use map for this area.
So just to follow up, so noting that it's a satellite, is there like an area or a part of a comprehensive plan that will address satellites on its own, or would this be competing with other projects to get a look at sooner or later?
So what we're doing is we are looking at areas that are getting a significant amount of development interest versus areas that are fairly stable and are not getting a significant amount of development interest. And those areas that are getting higher levels of interest are areas that we will spend extra time doing small area planning for.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Freeline.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is for Mr. DeBerry. Thank you for your closing out the presentation. It was great talking to you a couple weeks ago. We spoke one-on-one, and I just wanted to say I appreciate you sharing with me and the rest of council all the work you're doing in the community. I really personally appreciate that and think that'll be a big part of what gets us out of this violence crisis is mentors and brothers like you who really care. My question for you is about, you mentioned your board having several folks in Durham, and we got a email from someone, what was it, Dave Machado, who had some contradictory information about the board. They said the proposed governing board has no representation from Durham County and no professional educators based on looking at your application. And it sounds like that may have been incorrect. You're saying,
Yeah, that's definitely incorrect. Yeah. We've got Edna Van, who has 15 years experience here in Durham Public Schools. She was in special education teacher and assistant principal.
okay,
And then we've got Dr. Derek Sauls. Of course, he's on the college level at St. Augustine University. And but those on the board, but we've already have a principal who has about 8-9 years of principal experience, and she's actually from Durham.
okay. So yeah, I guess the suggestion was that no one on the board like currently resides, that they're from Granville and Lee and Wayne counties, but not are currently based in Durham. Am I hearing that folks are from Durham, but maybe have moved out of the county, or that you do have board members that are based here in Durham? Just curious.
Yeah, well, I live here in Durham, and the van, from what I understand, I think she lives in the Durham, and the principal lives here in Durham.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that until we got a letter about it. And I said, oh, that's strange. They're doing a Durham school and very little or none of their board lives here.
Well, I mean, I'm almost sure that the majority of our teachers and our employees would be from Durham.
Okay.
Councilmember Freeman?
Yeah.
If I may just make a comment.
Sure.
The materials that you saw are a year old. And they go back to the original charter that was presented to the state. And there were a number of misstatements of fact in the materials that were sent in and that were covered by a press article at the time. And in any event, it's not current information because at the time they didn't actually have a place. They didn't know what property was going to be or where it was going to be located. So the issues that you raise are no longer currently accurate statements.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Could I ask you another question as well?
Sure.
Again, going to another critique, perhaps this is kind of also outdated, but the letter also kind of mentions something about heritage and the extent to which that these projects from other heritage projects, specifically Wake Forest Charter Academy, has kind of increased some disparities in the school systems. But you mentioned that there was another school in Durham that Heritage Charter had, been looking over or had been responsible for the past decade. So I was just kind of curious to hear more about Wake Forest Charter Academy, and in your opinion, how that affected its community and how the other school that Heritage has in Durham has kind of impacted the demographics. I'm just kind of curious about those things.
I'm not aware of the details relating to what the Wake Forest Charter Academy is doing now. I know that National Heritage has operated the Research Triangle Academy here in Durham very successfully for 10 years. I probably ought to defer to Bob Dunstan, who is with National Heritage, to talk specifically about the details related to Research Triangle Academy and generally, the demographic makeup of National Heritage schools. My understanding is that the demographic makeup tends to be very much reflective of the area in which the schools are located. But Bob, let me defer to you and let you answer that question more specifically.
Yeah, Bill, I think that was absolutely spot on. Most all of our schools generally reflect the surrounding population, the demographics, if you would. We expect the same, at the new Oak Charter Academy as well. So as far as specifics on effects on surrounding schools, I'm sorry, Councilman Freeland, we don't have that kind of information.
Okay.
Actually pinpoint that too. Everything's a little different. Every new school you open, that's a whole new group of families and students. So it's very hard to answer that, I think, specifically how you want it answered.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that response. I guess I'm looking at this email today, and I know this was up for discussion. It's been an open thing since we talked about it a couple months ago. But I'm kind of seeing this email with some of this feedback because it was emailed to us today. So that's I appreciate your attempts to respond and understand that it would have been good to let you know ahead of time so you could have came with that information. But thanks for giving it a shot.
Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Other questions for the applicant or for staff? Any other questions for applicant or for staff? All right. Hearing none, I'm going to declare this public hearing closed. The matter's back before the council. And now I'll ask council members if there are any comments that you would like to make.
Mr. Mayor, I did try and throw up a finger.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I apologize. Go ahead and ask your question. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I didn't see you.
Not at all. Not at all. Good evening, everyone. Firstly, I heard a familiar name during the listing of the board of directors, so I feel I should disclose. One of the names I heard, Edna Van, is actually a member of my church, and she definitely lives in Durham. Because I visited her home, so I don't think there's anything that legally precludes me from participating in this matter, but I thought just in the spirit of disclosure, I should disclose that. The staff has, and Mr. DeBerry, this is for you, sir, and it's good to hear you. So the staff has recommended that we approve this annexation without any consideration of the vices or virtue of the academy. They've cited filling in holes in terms of contiguous annexation, talked about it being revenue positive. So they bracketed out the consideration of whether or not this is again, the vices versus of the academy itself, and have recommended. But the fact that you put something in evidence tonight, Mr. DeBerry, you said that the school would work not to exclude any students. And usually when we talk about charter schools, when we talk about exclusion, usually the ways they do that is through transportation, EC services, free lunch, things of that nature. So could you tell us how this school is since you spoke on it, is going to make sure that students aren't excluded? If he's still on.
Mr. DeBerry, are you still with us? Let me just look on the, okay. I believe Mr. DeBerry is with us still. Mr. DeBerry.
Okay, I'm here, yes.
Right.
Yes.
Did you hear Councilmember Middleton's question?
Yes, I did. We are going to offer transportation, and we are going to offer EC service. And what was the third one?
I believe I said free lunch.
Yes. We're going to offer all those services.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. All right. The public hearing has been closed, and now I'm asking if there are any questions. I'm sorry, any comments by members of the council? Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate all that's been shared about the school, but just acknowledging this is an annexation case. I'm a little concerned about the way this annexation is coming forward with road improvements and no buffer. And I'm also concerned about the way this plays into the plan that we're working on, the comprehensive plan, and acknowledging that there are a lot of factors in play and where investment is happening and not. And so I don't want to spur on investment in an area that's kind of stable right now, and acknowledging that it's all county. And so I think that it would be best to keep it county at this point. I do think that in a future conversation, there might be some space to talk about what happens in that area. And I would love to be a part of that conversation with Oak Academy or whomever, but I don't think that right now this is a good time to move forward with an annexation, noting that satellite is there and we're not looking at, it's not going to be filled in anytime soon. I don't want to create the disruption or unintended consequence of a disruption that forces investment in that direction. So I do have to say that I will be voting against this annexation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Any other comments, colleagues? Councilmember Freelon.
I just have a question. Call it just a rookie thing, but for Councilmember Freeman, when you mentioned the lack of, I took a mental note when you asked Planning Director Young about the planning. Is it that, or I guess maybe this might even be a question for Young as well, is when is the planning going to take place? I guess I'm kind of curious if, from your standpoint, looking at this purely from the standpoint of does this fit into our plan or not, is when are those plans going to take place? I didn't kind of get a clear idea of that, if or when.
Sure. So we are wrapping up the part of the comprehensive plan to develop the goals and objectives, which, as we all know, was delayed by our current situation a bit. And that is supposed to wrap up late winter, early spring of next year. We are working behind the scenes on some technical stuff, compiling information so that we can then immediately get started on the next phase, which of the comprehensive plan, which will be to look at specific land use patterns and issues throughout the entire county, inclusive of the city. So we'll start probably next summer and take about 6 months to a year to work through. So we're looking at, at least I would say best case scenario, a year and a half before we have land use recommendations.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And then just to add to that, Councilmember Freelon, your question about my point, I'm particularly concerned about the planning needs right now and where they need to be directed. And I don't want to force an addition to that planning list. I've been on that list in my neighborhood trying to get a local historic district passed that took 7 years. I don't want to do the same thing for projects that I know have come forward already or already in the pipeline. And so I just want to make sure that we're doing our due diligence and making sure that we're coordinating our annexations or what have you in a way that makes it possible for staff to keep up with.
Got it. Thanks for clarifying.
Thank you, council member. Any other comments, colleagues? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To make some brief comments, when we are brought these kind of annexations and rezonings and other land use cases, the charge before us is to act in the best interests of Durham. And I think that our planning department can give us certain information about, things like whether the city would gain or lose money as a result of an annexation, whether it meets our all of our land use policies. But I think whether or not something is good for Durham is much broader than that. And in this case, we know that charter schools are siphoning money from our public school districts, effectively privatizing as well as segregating our schools. Public schools are a public good, and they require public investment and public commitment. The 772 students that would attend this school would represent over $2.5 million in lost revenue from our public school district. And that's based on a 2017 study by a professor at the Duke Sanford School that showed that for every student that leaves a public school district for a charter, that $3,500 of public resources go with that student. And so this is not just a decision about whether the city about whether this is revenue neutral or revenue positive or revenue negative for the city, or about road improvements, or just these land use pieces. This is a really important public policy decision about the kind of community that we are building here and the investment in our public schools that I think we need to keep front and center. The majority of Durham's children of color are in our public school system, over 30,000 students, 80% of them Black and Latinx, depend on our public schools, and they depend on public school funding every day for their educations. Especially now with COVID, and all of the challenges that our public schools are facing. Increasing the number of charter schools in Durham is a bad policy decision. And so I'll be voting against this annexation to protect that $2.7 million of revenue in our public district that thousands of Black and brown kids depend on. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. Are there any other comments by members of the council? Councilmember Middleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to partially associate myself with the Mayor Pro Tem's comments. And I struggled with this as well. When I filled out my paperwork, to run for the city council, not the school board. And I think my purview as a decision maker for the city takes in a lot of things, and a lot of considerations. I asked specifically about transportation, and listen, full disclosure, and I'm on record. I have serious issues with charter schools, and the way that they oftentimes, actually the way that our children have been excluded have been because they got to cherry pick because of issues like transportation and EC services and lunch and uniform assistance. The Mayor Pro Tem is precisely right about the money that goes to these schools, but attached to that money is an actual person, an actual child. It's not just abstract money. And I don't know how many IEPs I've sat in with parents who were struggling because their kids were being promoted and could not read. Because the achievement gap and the disparate levels in suspension rates happened under our watch. And the place that I have negotiated in between is one, or the compromise, if you will, that I've made, is that if you're gonna do it, and they're gonna force it upon us, then are you going to do what's necessary to make sure that you don't get to use the levers that operationalize your exclusion, which is transportation, which is the lunch, which are EC services, and things of that nature. I think that we have to be very careful because these students are not just DPS students, they're citizens and residents of Durham. And we are charged to look out for all of them. Listen, I appreciate the robust policy debate that needs to be had about charter schools. But have we not learned anything about making decisions and telegraphing that we are politicizing decisions, that we're being capricious with certain decisions because we're putting them to litmus tests that I think are appropriate. I'm not saying that they're not appropriate to look at those things, but at the end of the day, to implicitly suggest that somehow supporting this annexation would be anti-public schools, anti-children of public schools is just inappropriate. And moreover, it's factually not true. The staff bracketed out, and the staff bracketed out those considerations and brought to us what we were supposed to do. I totally agree that we need to be making decisions that take into account the greater good of the city. And there are decisions we've made time and time again that I think did not take it the greater good of the city. I think they took in what we thought was our best view and the best view of the city, which is what a deliberative body is about. So upon the strength of the staff's recommendation, I will be supporting the annexation, but I reject any notion that in supporting the annexation that can somehow be interpreted as being anti-DPS or anti-public schools. I do not think that logically follows from supporting it, so I just wanted to say that. But I do want to associate myself with the proposition that we are called to act in the greater good, for the greater good of the city. And sometimes that's nuanced, sometimes that brings in a whole lot of different variables. And I think this is one of those times. So, and I will continue to have my problems and my objections to charter schools. And I will continue to try and make decisions for this city based upon a full reading of what is good for the city and not just through the strain of my particular ideological address. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Council Member. Colleagues, any other comments on this item? Councilmember Caballero.
Yeah, I will be voting no on this item, and have many reservations around, especially where it's located in consideration. You know, a few years ago, Glen Elementary, which is right down the road from this school, was almost taken over by the state. And there was a huge community fight to keep it within DPS. And I do say that I find it interesting that the school placement is very close to the zoned school of Southern and Glen. So that's just one observation of mine. I also have a lot of reservations because this is a for-profit charter company. If my research is correct, I should have probably asked that and apologize in that. And I think that that is a very different outcome than what I think historically charter schools at least began, which was folks who were wanting to create spaces for pedagogical innovation and educational innovation, parents and community members asking the state permission, and it was a very different process than what is now happening in the charter school space, which is often for-profit charters. So I just wanted to share some of my reservations. We'll be voting no, and thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Any further comments? Colleagues? All right, I'll make some comments. I appreciate very much the presentation. I especially want to thank Mr. DeBerry for being here and for your community activism, sir, and for what you've brought to the discussion tonight. I don't think that an annexation petition is the ideal way for these topics to get joined, but in fact, that's the one that we have in front of us. And so let me just say that after thinking about this a lot, I'm also going to be voting against this, and let me explain why. I put a lot of weight on the fact that the Durham Public Schools Board is in strong opposition to this, per the communication that we got from Chair Umstead, and that the Wake County Board Board of Education is also in opposition to this school. And as I say, I put a lot of weight on that. I think that I have no problem with any parent making the kind of decision that they want to make that they think is best for their child. I understand that we have choices out in our school system, and I have, I know so many people who've made the choice to send their kids to charter schools and or private schools, and I understand those individual choices. But I think that's different than what is the important, what's the policy consideration that's best for Durham. And I view this, and that's how I think we have to think about every annexation or zoning case or any item that comes before it. What's the best thing for our community? And I was on the school board for 4 years, and the way I like to think about this is each decision is what's the best outcome for the most children in the most schools over time. And from that standpoint, in general, let's just say it's no secret that I believe that charter schools have been detrimental to Durham Public Schools in many ways. I think that they have been resegregating, and I think that they have also really taken so much of the good parental and professional energy out of our public schools, and that has been damaging. And this school in particular, being as the school board noted, being in the right there with Glen School, with the transformation efforts underway there, I think is also just in particular a problem. So I think that, as I say, this is not an ideal vehicle in which these issues are joined, but it is a vehicle, it is what we are faced with. And I think that I have to think about each of these decisions in terms of what's best for the most students in the most schools over time. And I don't think that's approval of this annexation. All right. Any further comments?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. If there are no further comments, there are 3 motions that would be needed to approve this item. The first would be to adopt an ordinance annexing National Heritage Academies into the city of Durham. Is there a motion for that?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Freeman, and I believe I'm not sure who seconded. Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem, that we adopt an ordinance annexing National Heritage Academies into the city of Durham. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schul,
No.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
No.
Councilmember Caballero,
No.
Councilmember Freelon,
No.
Councilmember Freeman,
No.
Councilmember Middleton,
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The motion fails 1-6. And I appreciate, thank you all for everyone who was here to comment on this item tonight. And Madam Attorney, I don't believe we need to take up the following motions. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Thank you very much. And thank you to Mr. Cahill. We'll now move to item 21. I'm sorry. We're now moving to item 22 per the request of the city manager. We're going to consider this one first. This is item Z18-00032, 1700 Hillandale Road. And we'll first hear the report from staff, and I see Mr. Cahill again with us.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Schul, Madam Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, and council members. Good evening, Alexander Cahill and with the Planning Department, and I'm still happy to be here with you. So we did receive a request for case Z18-0032 for a zoning map change. This was received from Ed Helberg and Jim Anthony of Hillandale Partners, LLC, for a total of 14 parcels of land, almost 12 acres in size, located at 1700 Hillandale Road. The applicant is proposing to change the zoning designation of the site from residential suburban 10 to planned development residential 7.838 for a maximum of 85 mixed single-family townhouse units. No changes proposed to the future land use map designation of medium density residential, which is consistent with the rezoning request as is. The neighborhood association, and this is a narrative here where the neighborhood association worked closely with the applicant to find a balance between what the neighborhood needs out of this project and what would make this project feasible for the applicant as well. At the August 25th Planning Commission meeting, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of this case 11-0. Staff also analyzed the proposed development for consistency with the comprehensive plan policies and determined that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and it does exceed applicable policies and ordinance in the UDO. There are 2 motions that are required for this application. The first is to adopt a consistency statement, and the second is to approve the rezoning request. Thank you very much, and staff is available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cahill. Colleagues, you have heard the report from staff. I'm going to now declare this public hearing open. And first, I'm going to ask if there are any questions for staff by members of the council. Any questions for staff by members of the council? All right. Hang on one second. Let me get to my notes here. I have a question for you, Mr. Cahill. It says in the memo, these impacts, this is concerning the construction of the southbound lane. These impacts will be addressed by the construction of an exclusive southbound left turn lane on Hillandale Road, the construction of a second northbound through lane on Hillandale Road along the property frontage southern property line, and through the coordination of City Project SW46D, see attached. Okay, so what does it mean, the northbound through lane on Hillandale Road along the property frontage southern property line? Isn't it along the Hillandale Road is not along the southern property line of that property, it's along the western property line. Am I wrong?
That's a great question that I can look into here in just a second. And
I see Mr. Judge coming to your rescue.
Yes, Bill Judge, Transportation. What we were trying to describe there is that the additional lane will start at the southern property line of the site, so it will be along the eastern side of the roadway, but will run for the frontage of the site.
That's what I thought. Okay, we're just getting that clear. Thank you. I think that's my only question for staff. All righty. So now we will hear from the folks who have signed up to speak on this item. I believe there are two people, Sandra Bach and Doug Hodges. I believe both would like to speak on this item. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on this item? And if so, could you please raise your virtual hand? I see Tom Miller would like to speak on this item. Or put your name in the chat. And Jim Anthony would like to speak on this item. All right. I know that Mr. Miller and Mr. Anthony are both proponents. Mr. Hodges and Ms. Bach, are you proponents or opponents of this? And if maybe we could make them available to be heard, Madam Clerk. Douglas Hodges, and Sandra Bach. Ms. Bach, I believe you can be heard now. Are you a proponent or an opponent of this?
Well, that's hard to say. I guess I'm a opponent based on traffic patterns, and my proponent for the mixed use increase of units, affordable housing. But my concern is the traffic on Hillandale, which, as I think everybody knows, is a problem.
Ms. Bach, hang on. Thank you. That was helpful. Mr. Hodges, how about you? How would you characterize your, are you similar to Ms. Bach, or do you, would you characterize yourself as a proponent or an opponent?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I'm neither. Having received a registered invitation to participate in this evening's meeting, I felt that I should voice one concern I have, and my concern that I have is, what if the city engineers have it incorrect? My property where I live is 25.
Mr. Hodges, hang on one second. The reason I'm asking these questions is because we have protocol about people who are proponents and opponents. We'll hear you out in just a minute, okay?
Okay.
Great, don't worry. You will get to be heard, I promise you, and as well, Ms. Bach. Okay. So I see that we have two speakers who are proponents, Mr. Anthony and Mr. Miller, and we're going to hear from them first. Madam Clerk, will you please make Mr. Tom Miller and Mr. Jim Anthony available to be heard?
Mr. Mayor, they're both able to speak right now.
I see. Yes, they are. Thank you. All right. I'm going to Mr. Anthony and Mr. Miller, I'm going to give you both 3 minutes. If you need more than that, we can figure that out. But let's start with that. I hope that'll be satisfactory. And we'll begin with you, Mr. Anthony.
Thank you, Mayor Schul. Almost 3 years ago, actually, it might be more than that, we began assembling this property along Hillandale Road for residential development purposes. And I must say that the number of meetings with the neighborhoods yielded some new friendships and a lot of refinements to plans that evolved over that period of time. And as we added more lots to the property, I thought it was a really wonderful process. I'm thankful for the neighbors' complete engagement in the process and how we were able to come to a place where we had our differences, we worked through them. It took time, but it was really worth it. And I was and continue to be very thankful for that level of engagement. And I'm ready to answer any questions that might come up during this conversation. So thank you for considering this, and we're excited about the project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anthony. Mr. Miller, welcome. You also have 3 minutes, and if you need more, we can talk about that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't need hardly any time at all. I want to make sure that the council members know that in addition to being an advocate for the neighborhood and a speaker in this case, I also serve you on the Planning Commission, and I provided you with written comments. And those written comments encompass everything that I would say here tonight, and I won't repeat them, but I am available for questions. I do urge you to approve this rezoning and the next item, which would be the closure of those portions of Chesterfield, Sovereign, and Drake that are necessary to make this project possible.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. I will say that we were aware that you were a member of the Planning Commission. I think some members of this council, Mr. Miller, would say that they were only too aware that you were a member of the Planning Commission. But we're glad to have you here tonight as in another capacity as well. And we are eternally grateful for your work. And for that, and as I say that, I'm very serious. Thank you. All right. Now we'll hear from Ms. Bach. Ms. Bach, you also have 3 minutes. If you need more, we'll figure that out. But go ahead and please express yourself, and any questions you might have, we'll get them answered.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be succinct. I appreciate Mr. Anthony and Mr. Miller also being here because I do have questions. I'm on the Hillandale side of this property. I'm considered an adjacent property across Hillandale, directly across from this questionable property at 1700. As I've said before, there's a known issue for the 1 mile of stretch of Hillandale between I-85 and 147 that goes from 4 lanes to 2 lanes and then back to 4 lanes. My concern is that the traffic crossing from my side of Hillandale on the Hillandale Commons side, crossing Hillandale into the Watts Hillandale Commons, Watts Hillandale area, or taking a left to go north on Hillandale is quite the problem. This is our only exit out of the neighborhood. Currently, there's just a stop sign on Hillandale, on Indian Trail, no stop sign on Hillandale. So we are fighting all the traffic on Hillandale to get either across or northbound. My option that I use frequently is to turn right and go through the golf course parking lot so I can turn around and turn right again to go northbound on Hillandale, but that's getting difficult. I'm concerned about the danger to the safety of the people in this neighborhood. As we try and get across, there's been quite a few accidents. There was one last week. My suggestion would be traffic pattern change, maybe a traffic circle that would help keep traffic flowing, because I know that that's an issue here, but it would slow down some of the traffic. Traffic coming off 85 coming south on Hillandale tend to go quite fast. Either that or a light. My suggestion would be a traffic circle or a light. Otherwise, I'm in opposition of expanding any further development that affects Hillandale traffic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Bach. I think now we'll hear from Mr. Hodges, and then we can hear from the applicant or staff responding to your concerns. Mr. Hodges, we're glad to have you. You also have 3 minutes, and if you need more, we can figure that out.
Mr. Mayor, well, thank you very much. I'm neither an opponent or proponent of the project. My concern is I received a registered mail from the City of Durham inviting me to participate in this meeting. My property is 2520 Indian Trail, which is the low point of the area with, with significant water runoff coming down the stream over into Hillandale. My concern is, what if the city engineers have their calculations incorrect? And what would the recourse be if there is flooding on my property? Again, I'm not a proponent or opponent, just would like to know what my recourse would be if the engineers have the numbers incorrect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hodges. I'm going to ask staff first if there's someone here who could answer Mr. Hodges' question. I think that Ms. Bach's question might better be addressed by the applicant. Ms. Young, welcome. Could you answer Mr. Hodges' question?
Certainly. I will start by saying that I'm not a stormwater expert, so I can only tell you the bit that I know, which is that the developers, engineers are required to design and sign and seal their calculations, their designs for the property to make sure that they comply with applicable regulations regarding stormwater and runoff, et cetera. And that public works staff review those to ensure that they are accurate. It goes through a fairly rigorous review. I do know that. In the event that there is flooding that exceeds expectations, it could be for a number of reasons. Again, I'm not an expert, but I know that our stormwater folks in the Public Works Department work with folks all the time when there are unanticipated consequences. One of the biggest challenges we know is that while new development does design to current modern stormwater standards, old development that predates that doesn't. And so you can still experience additional flooding as a result of new development, but not necessarily because of any design flaws, mostly because of existing conditions. So I would say that in the event that something should happen, the city would work with, and here I am volunteering our public works staff, but I know that they do this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, is they try and work with folks in the community to find solutions to problems, even when they're on private property.
Thank you, Ms. Young. I think it would also be beneficial for Mr. Hodges if we could either hear from Mr. Cahill or from the applicant about the stormwater treatment that is planned for this property.
Yeah, I think we can both jump in. Let me just add, so this was a concern that the neighborhood had throughout the process and something that they worked very closely on with to add as a text commitment to the development plan. So in the development plan, you can see there are elements number 14 and 13 address this, but it was really designed so that the stormwater control measures for the project should be designed so there's no increase in the peak flow for the 100-year 24-hour storm. And this is for downstream of the site. So this was to help protect residents such as Doug Hodges and others. And if the applicant wants to jump in as well.
Does the applicant have anything that they would like to add, Mr. Anthony, other than what Mr. Cahill has said regarding the stormwater?
I will simply say that having been through the stormwater review process with the city, I can assure Mr. Hodges and anyone else listening that they are quite rigorous in how detailed that they are when they're examining the calculations and the measures that are taken to protect downstream properties. So we have to go through that process when we come in with the site plan. So in addition to making these commitments, when the site plan comes in for review, it's got a fine-tooth comb that's coming at it.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Mr. Hodges, I'm going to also suggest that you be in touch with Mr. Cahill after the meeting, and he can put it. I was looking at the folks on this call. No one from our stormwater department is on this call, but I think it would be beneficial for you to be able to talk to them. And Mr. Cahill, could you communicate with Mr. Hodges and make that possible for him?
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Hodges, let me ask, do you have any further questions?
Yeah, I don't have a question, Mr. Mayor. I am just very, very concerned. The property is on a low point there. I appreciate that we've had experts, and I respect the professionalism of everybody on this call and in this meeting. But I am going on record as expressing my major concern for flooding in this area.
Understood and appreciate that. I'm going to ask Mr. Cahill to reach out to you to get you in touch with someone in stormwater, particularly who you can talk to further about that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Cahill, can you do that?
Yes,
All
sir.
right. Thank you. Now I'm going to also ask either staff or the applicant to respond to the concerns of Ms. Bach. Ms. Bach's concerns were of a different nature. They had to do with the traffic on Hillandale Road, especially where she comes out of her neighborhood, which I can attest is an incredibly difficult entry onto Hillandale Road. And so her concern is that this is only going to make that worse. And so could I ask either the applicant or Mr. Cahill to respond? Mr. Anthony, would you like to respond? I see you're unmuted there.
Sure, I will lead off. We heard these concerns quite clearly beginning 3 years ago in our meetings with the neighbors. In fact, part of why the request to close these roads was made on behalf of the neighborhood, and we agreed to it, was the very concern that has been raised, that the traffic coming into that particular intersection at Indian Trail it didn't need any help at all to get backed up down there. And so to keep our traffic on Hillandale Road, we have one point of access significantly to the north of the Indian Trail intersection, and it is a right-in only access. So traffic coming out of our neighborhood is required to turn right and then go north to do a left turn up on those super street turns that are to the north of Interstate 85. So I want to reassure the folks that live in the neighborhood that I affectionately call the Circle neighborhood, that there will not be any additional burden placed on the Indian Trail intersection because all of our traffic has to go north. In addition to that, there will be widening of the road to accommodate the left turn into our community coming to the south, and the additional lane being constructed along Hillandale Road on the eastern border of Hillandale Road.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. Mr. Cahill, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, I'll just add that this is one, if you had time to look at the development plan, tax commitments, this is one of the more robust cases we've had where the applicant really worked to address these concerns in terms of traffic mitigation strategies. And if you look, there are at least 7 tax commitments that work to address this. I just want to remind the honorable council members that these are in excess of the current Unified Development Ordinance standards that the applicant has decided to proffer in the development plan to work to address and mitigate these concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Cahill. Ms. Bach, do you have any further questions?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm curious for Mr. Anthony, whose voice is just spectacular. Did you have a chance to work with the Hillandale Commons president? And I don't even know who that is. I'm embarrassed to say I'm kind of new to Durham, so forgive me.
The answer to that is no, we did not. And that wasn't by any particular decision. It just didn't happen.
Thank you. Ms. Bach, any further questions?
I guess just quickly, a question to Mr. Miller. I know Mr. Miller's very active in our community and I appreciate everything that he does. Mr. Miller, did you happen to reach out to the Hillandale Commons president?
Oh, certainly. We had a neighborhood committee that worked on this, and then we held several, probably 4 larger neighborhood meetings. And then for 3 years, I think we published long articles in our neighborhood newsletter, 11 of those, to keep everybody informed. And of course, one of the issues has always been with this piece of property is that you've got these 12 acres back in there that have attracted a great deal of attention from the commercial development community. And we have resisted all the attempts to rezone and develop the property for motels and fast food restaurants and office complexes, all of which would generate much higher traffic volumes than the residential component that we ultimately agreed to. So I think that our approach to settling the future of this property has always been to find an appropriately sized and appropriate a residential development of appropriate density, keeping in mind that a function of density is traffic generation. It is a difficult problem. We have been with Hillandale Commons to the North Carolina Department of Transportation on a number of occasions to talk about controlling traffic at Indian Trail and Hillandale. And of course, they've told us that they use a term called warrants. There isn't enough traffic on Indian Trail under their standards to justify a traffic light. But ultimately, it is a traffic light, I think, that is going to become necessary in order to have a safe ingress and egress there. I'm not sure where ultimately we will go. We do have to see this, although the traffic generated by this project is an issue, but ultimately this property can and should be developed, and we feel that of all the possible ways it might be developed in the future, this is the best way to develop it, and this is an opportunity that we can't pass up now. But I do realize that it's a problem, especially during peak hours. I use that intersection myself on a regular basis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. Ms. Bach, I also want to add, probably 6 or 8 years ago, your neighborhood did a great job advocating for a traffic signal. But again, DOT denied that and said that there was not enough traffic there for the light. But of course, that could change. All right, thank you all very much for the people who were here to discuss this. And I want to now ask, is there anyone else here present who would like to be heard on this item? All righty, I don't see any. I do have a couple of questions for the applicant. The memo refers on several occasions to the Hillandale Road bike head path as being completed in 2021. This is actually for staff as well. I believe, however, that project, because of DOT funding, has now been put back. Is that correct? Mr. Judge?
That is correct. The project's sort of in a holding pattern at the moment, waiting to go to right-of-way acquisition for NCDOT to authorize additional funding. So it will not probably go to construction in 2021. We don't have an exact date at this point, but it's likely not to make that date.
Is it, Mr. Judge, is it one of the projects that was put back to 2028?
It is not yet. So this one is sort of frozen. It has not had an updated schedule adjustment yet. It's in the next round of priorities that we've asked to be unfrozen, I guess. It's primarily federal funding that the state has. And as you know, it's a long, complicated way that they allocate that funding that's holding it up at the moment.
Okay, thanks. I was just, if it had been one of those, that later tier, I was going to have another question for the applicant, but I appreciate that. BPAC referred to a question for the developer about safety considerations as their driveway entrance crosses the eventual bike ped path that's going to be built there. And I wondered if the applicant could comment on any discussions about that have been held, or any thoughts that you might have about how to make that exit safe for people on that path.
Certainly. It is our intention that the exit and entrance onto Hillandale Road will be marked very clearly with the bike and pedestrian crossings. There is a sidewalk there today, and that sidewalk obviously will have to be cut out and replaced. But there will be very clear markings and most likely additional signage on top of the usual stop signs that you would see at a corner, identifying the crossing that is going to be there forever. And there's actually a fair number of walkers on that sidewalk. So we absolutely are committed to protecting those folks on bikes and on feet safely.
Thank you. All right, colleagues, any other questions? All righty. If not, I'm going to declare this public hearing closed, and the matter is now back before the council. We would need two motions. Well, first would be to adopt the consistency statement.
So moved.
Is there a second? Moved by Councilmember Freeman, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Johnson to adopt the consistency statement. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Schewel.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero.
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon.
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton.
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. The second motion will be to adopt an ordinance amending the UDO.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Reese, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Johnson. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schewel.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero.
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon.
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton.
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. I want to thank Ms. Bach and Mr. Hodges for being here and expressing your concerns, which are very important concerns. And I want to thank the applicant and the neighborhood for working so long and hard together to come to a conclusion that the Planning Commission could actually support 11-0. Well, I won't say this is unheard of. I'll just say that it's unusual. And I want to express my gratitude for you all for having these difficult discussions and coming up with something that both the neighborhood and the applicant could support. So thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, council member.
before we move off this item, I just wanted to say a special word of thanks to Commissioner Miller, whose service to the city is something we all appreciate. I know in addition to serving on the Planning Commission, he's active in other civic and community organizations. But I just wanted to take a special moment to say how grateful I am for his work in kind of bridging the gap between the developer here and the folks who live in this neighborhood, and the very forthright way he explained how this process unfolded and what he saw as the benefits to the agreement that they reached with the neighborhoods in his written comments. As I've often said, I don't necessarily always agree with Commissioner Miller's written comments or the positions he takes on the Planning Commission, but I always find them well-reasoned, thoughtful, and they always help me understand the issues that come before us. And so when we don't have a written comments for whatever reason from Commissioner Miller, I find my own personal consideration of these types of items is always poor for it. And so I just wanted to take a quick moment to say thank you to Commissioner Miller, not only for your broader service to the community, but also for your work on the specific project and getting to an answer that we can all live with. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Let me second those thoughts and say that even if I don't agree with Mr. Miller's comments, they give me something really powerful to argue with. So thank you very much, Council Member, for those comments. All right, we'll now move to item 21, Z180013 Chesterfield Avenue street closing. Staff has recommended that we take up after the last item for obvious reasons. And I see Ms. Struthers is here to start us off.
Good evening, thank you. I'm Emily Struthers with the Planning Department, presenting Chesterfield Avenue street closing, case SC 18-00013, noting a correction to the agenda where the case letter should be SC rather than Z for this street closing. Ed Helberg with...
I want you to know, Ms. Struthers, that I caught that. No, I didn't. I just...
Ed Helberg with the Anthony and Company request to permanently close Chesterfield Avenue and portions of Drake Avenue and Sovereign Street west of Tampa Avenue. The total area of requested closure encompasses 77,768 square feet and is currently unimproved. The streets proposed for closing are within the area of the 1700 Hillandale rezoning case, which was just heard. If this request is approved, the closed right-of-way acreage will be added to adjacent parcels owned by Hillandale Partners, LLC, as shown on the street closing plat attachment 4. The plat also proposes sanitary sewer easements and recombination of lots. This request to close Chesterfield Avenue and portions of Drake Avenue and Sovereign Street west of Tampa Avenue meet applicable ordinance requirements. The staff recommendation pursuant to North Carolina General Statute 160A-299, a street closing should not be approved by council if the proposed closing is contrary to the public interest. However, staff recommends approval of the request to close the 77,768 square feet of Chesterfield Avenue, Drake Avenue, and Sovereign Street, following the recently recommended rezoning for the Hillandale case. Staff is available for any questions on the street closing request. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Struthers. Colleagues, you have heard the report from staff, and I'm now going to declare this public hearing open. I see that Mr. Anthony has signed up to speak on this item. Mr. Anthony? Would you like to be heard, Mr. Anthony?
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So very briefly, the streets that are subject to this closure request are in fact in the middle of the neighborhood. They were never built. The neighborhood really didn't want them to be built, and we're waiting for a project like ours to come along so that they could be closed. And we actually closed the stubs to these streets like 2 years ago. And so that piece is done. The streets actually don't go anywhere now. And for the reasons that we discussed earlier, we wanted to make certain that this new project only exited onto Hillandale Road. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. This is a public hearing. Is there anyone else present who would like to be heard on this item? If so, could you please make yourself, please raise your virtual hand or let us know in the chat. I don't see anyone else, and so I'll now declare this public hearing closed, and the matter is back before the council. We'll take one motion to approve this, to adopt an order permanently closing the Chesterfield Avenue. I'm sorry, Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I make the motion, I just wanted to note a comment and just saying that this is a great example of undoing the harm of placing a street over a stream buffer. And I think that this is the type of work that I'm hoping that we'll get to in having some of our small area planning conversations, because there have been some, I guess, some decisions that have been made in the past based on, I guess, limited understanding or limited information that I would love to see corrected. Thank you. And I'd like to make a motion to close the street.
Thank you, Council Member. I'm sorry, I heard a second, but I'm not sure who from.
Second.
Mayor Pro Tem. It was moved by Councilmember Freeman, seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Johnson, that we adopted an order permanently closing 77,768 linear feet of Chesterfield Avenue. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schul,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero,
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon,
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton,
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. We'll now move to item 23, Unified Development Ordinance Text Amendment, various amendment related to affordable housing, the PDR District and the Falls Jordan Lake District A Watershed. And we will first hear a report from our staff.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Michael Stock with the Planning Department. Text Amendment TC 19-00004 is a privately initiated request by, again, Mr. Jim Anthony, to amend provisions of the Unified Development Ordinance regarding the affordable housing bonus, the planned density residential or PDR zoning district requirements, some parking standards, the definition of family, and uses within the Falls Jordan District A watershed overlay. I do want to note a few noteworthy things for this request. The application has gone through some changes. The application provided in the agenda packet reflects the one initially submitted to the Planning Commission. During Planning Commission hearings, it was revised by the applicant to remove proposed changes to open space and tree coverage areas. Thus, they were not considered by the Planning Commission's final recommendation and are also not before you tonight. The second change involves the two versions in front of you tonight. There's an applicant version in attachment C1 and a Planning Commission recommended version in C2. It's a little bit different than what you've normally seen in the past. The applicant has actually accepted predominantly most of the Planning Commission recommendations, except for two items. I'm just going to walk through those quickly with you. And those two items represent the only differences between the two versions. The first is that the applicant is maintaining his request to remove minimum parking requirements only for affordable housing units in the suburban tier. The PC version did not recommend that, and thus it is not found within their proposed changes. And secondly, the applicant maintains a request to amend the definition of family from 3 to 6 unrelated persons, where the PC version recommends a change from 3 to 5. Again, those are the only two differences between the two versions, and also council may also wish to adopt a different version if it so chooses, but we don't want to make things too complicated. It's late in the night. The Planning Commission did recommend approval 11-3 of the Planning Commission version on August 11th. As a reminder, two actions are requested. First is a statement of consistency found within your agenda packet, and then the ordinance for adoption, either attachment C1, C2, or if there happens to be a separate version. Thank you, and the applicant is available and is in attendance tonight.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stock. You all have heard the report from staff, and I'm now going to declare this public hearing open. But first, I saw a comment. I received a note from Ms. Young that this is Ms. Struthers' last meeting, that she's leaving us. Ms. Young, would you like to make some comments? We've so appreciated Ms. Struthers' work.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I didn't want to interrupt the meeting, but I didn't want Ms. Struthers to leave without an acknowledgement of her dedicated service to the department, to the city, for being at many, many meetings presenting to you all. And I wanted to publicly thank her for her service with us.
Thank you, and I want to agree very much. Yes, applause is definitely warranted. We've really appreciated you, Ms. Struthers. Thank you so much. I hope that you're going on to something wonderful. We're going to certainly miss you in the city of Durham. And thank you so much for your service. We really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed my time here.
Great. All right. We're now back to our business. And the public hearing is open, and I don't see anyone who has signed up to speak on this item, but let me ask, is there, oh, I'm sorry, I do. I'm wrong. I see Mr. Anthony, yes, who is the applicant in this case. Is there anyone else here who would like to speak on item 23? I see Mr. Harmon is here as well. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on item 23? All right. I'm going to and Mr. Miller. Okay, we have 3 people who would like to speak on this item. Mr. Harmon, I see that you can be heard. Could I ask, first of all, if you characterize yourself as an opponent or proponent of this on this item, or whether you have a more complicated view of this?
I'm a proponent.
All right, thank you, Mr. Harmon. Okay, and Mr. Miller, how would you characterize your position here in thinking through about speaking time?
Mr. Mayor, I was the chairman of the committee of the Planning Commission that drew the report that appears in your packet.
Yes, you were.
Had an opportunity to read that. Those are the comments that I'd ask. I make myself available for your questions.
All right, thank you. That's perfect. Thank you. All right, colleagues. We're first going to hear from Mr. Anthony and then Mr. Harmon, and I'm going to offer each of them 3 minutes, and if you need more than that, we can talk about it. Mr. Anthony, would you like to get started? Madam Clerk, could you make Mr. Anthony available to be heard?
There we go. So thank you, Mayor Schul and councilors. A little bit about the genesis of this list of requests. Some of you know, well, you certainly do now, that I've been working on many different properties throughout the city. And I was encountering roadblocks in the Unified Development Ordinance that were impeding our ability to get projects approved, and projects that I think the city really needs, that would increase the housing stock, and the particular type of product that I wanted to develop is a co-living product that is going to dramatically enhance the accessibility of brand new, really attractive housing options for a broad audience at prices that are affordable. And when I went to my meetings with the planning staff, they would tell me, well, we can't do that because the UDO doesn't allow it, and we can't do that. And I said, well, how do we address that? Do I need to do a special use permit? The recommendation came back, and this was a year and a half ago, maybe 2, that we started on this. Well, we think that you ought to consider amending the ordinance. And so that was the path that we chose. And we actually found that there was broad support, and I think Tom will talk to this, for the vast majority of the items that were suggested. Some inequities, for example, between the urban and the suburban tier, just little things like you had to have at least 4 acres to do a PDR rezoning, which really made no sense at all. To do infill sites less than 4 acres in the suburbs seems to make a lot of sense to increase the housing stock, yet you were not allowed to use PDR if you didn't have 4 acres. So we went through a series of things, and they are sitting before you if you have the patience to read through them. The net was that there were a couple of things with respect to open space and tree coverage items that we negotiated to take out of our request because there was opposition to reducing open space and tree coverage in a couple of situations that we requested, and so those were removed, as you heard earlier. And let me just stop with my 2 items that I didn't change. We're very close on 5 unrelated parties versus 6, but I believe that the city of Durham has many different residences scattered throughout the city where there is no compliance with the current 3 unrelated parties rule, and that raising the unrelated parties rule to 6 would actually make it possible for homeowners or apartment owners to increase the occupancy of their units and thereby of their buildings, and thereby facilitate a reduction in the rent per person. So that I still am a believer that that the 6-person cap will have the effect of facilitating more housing in infill properties. So I would ask that you consider raising it to 6. One of the things that was an obstacle was recognizing that the North Carolina State Building Code had a 5-person cap, even though cities like Charlotte had raised their cap to 6. Technically, they were violating the North Carolina Building Code. So when I found out about that, I went to the North Carolina Building Code through the Department of Insurance and made application to change the North Carolina code, and it has been approved now. So it's now 6 unrelated parties in any dwelling. So the second thing that we had a disagreement about at the Planning Commission was over the issue of whether parking could be exempt, new parking spaces be exempted in the situation where affordable housing units were being developed, legally defined affordable housing units defined as per the UDO. And I think the pushback came from, well, wait a minute, poor folks should be able to have a parking space too. And there was a misunderstanding at that point that I didn't seem to be able to break through in the conversation that ensued, that in actuality, we're simply asking for a reduction in the required parking spaces, and parking spaces are not assigned in apartment communities. So, you know, the affordable units don't go without a parking space. It just means that there's not additional spaces burdening the cost of the project. As many of you probably know, most apartment communities have more parking than they need because they are built to meet a parking code that addressed a world that existed 10 years ago. But today, the number of cars that are being used by individuals is actually shrinking. There's more and more ride sharing and folks using alternative modes of transportation. And we want to encourage people to use mass transit and alternative modes of transportation, including ride sharing. And so not having to build parking spaces, which simply adds to the cost of building units, enhances the ability to create affordable housing. So I dug my heels in on that one too, and I would ask that you would stand with me on that. The Planning Commission disagreed, and so you can decide here tonight how you feel about it. That's my thoughts, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Anthony. I gave you a lot more than 3 minutes, but I thought we needed to hear that, and I appreciate it. Now we'll hear from Mr. Harmon. Mr. Harmon, welcome. You have 3 minutes. If you need more, we can figure that out.
Thank you, Mayor. My name is Scott Harmon. I live in downtown Durham, and I want to thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of council for letting me speak tonight about the definition of family. I don't think a progressive city should concern itself with how we define family or home. I don't trust the underlying systems of racial and class oppression that created zoning 100 years ago, and which still, in my opinion, give affluent white communities a disproportionate influence over housing policy. Our definition of family looks like an attempt to keep certain kinds of families out of our neighborhoods, and I think it's wrong. I think the current family definition is too restrictive. There are thousands of builders, landlords, homeowners, tenants, and practitioners like myself that are responding to the housing crisis in innovative ways. We should encourage this. Instead, our planning process has become the defender of the privileged status quo. If we want to solve the housing crisis in Durham, we have to stop talking about what we can't build and start talking about what we can build. But the best reason to allow 6 humans to create a family and legally occupy a home is that the leaders and activists in East Durham asked you to. Last year, you passed the Expanding Housing Choices Initiative after leaders in East Durham organized with building practitioners like myself to carefully negotiate the right balance of innovation, incentive, and protection. The neighborhoods wanted the family definition changed then. Staff and council were supportive, but asked us to bring the issue back rather than further complicating and delaying EHC. So I'm here tonight to remind everyone of this lingering loose end to expanding housing choices and ask you to allow 6 humans to create a family and a home if they want to. I also want to put in a plug for the reduction of the parking requirements. There are 8 parking spaces created in this country for every passenger automobile. I think that statistic speaks for itself, and it's time for us to get serious about sustainability and walkability by stop requiring parking to dominate our projects. Thank you for your time tonight and for letting me speak. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harmon. We're glad to have you with us. All right, I believe that we have heard from everyone who is here to speak on this item. Mr. Miller's comments, as he said, are he chaired the committee of the Planning Commission, whose recommendations the Planning Commission adopted, and of course we have those comments in our packet. Colleagues, I'll now ask if there are any questions for staff or the applicant by members of the council. Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the details that were added tonight. I know I raised the issue at our work session about the housing or the housing for families being increased to 6. And I appreciate Mr. Harmon's point, and I do agree that that is hugely been an issue, but I've also noted that I would really like to hear if there are studies that reflect what was stated, because I've seen the opposite occur in pricing for apartments in communities across the country. And so I'm really hopeful that there is something that reflects something different, and that Mr. Anthony or Mr. Harmon could share that if they have it.
Thank you very much, Council Member. Mr. Anthony, Mr. Harmon, or any member of the staff like to comment on Councilmember Freeman's question?
I'll go first and simply say that I do not have any hard data studies that I can share with you. I'm sure that I can find them. I know intuitively and from my day-to-day research as someone who's been in commercial real estate for over 41 years, I see this trend of parking space use reduction in office buildings, in apartment communities. There are certainly some shopping centers that get, restaurants and bars and other types of users that have very heavy parking that spills into adjacent properties at times, but I don't see that happening with apartment communities. I don't see it happening with office buildings. It's interesting, just a quick story. In the 1990s, building office buildings with 5 spaces per 1,000 square feet was all the rage because everybody was going to move into cubes, and they never ever filled up those parking lots. It was just almost an unseen thing. And so there's these vast parking fields, completely unsustainable, as Scott said. But there they are, and we have them all around us. And in Durham, I see vast numbers of apartment communities where the number of residents who live in the bedrooms match up. But there are certainly, as we just heard, there are other situations where they're doubling up folks in bedrooms that does burden apartment properties, and they're out there. I'm not going to say they don't exist. That would be a lie. But it is the exception rather than the rule, particularly for those that are building new, that have professional management, and they don't allow lots of people to live and pack in bedrooms.
Thank you. Ms. Young, would you like to add something?
Yes, thank you. We did look into this issue after the work session, and did not turn up any conclusive data one way or the other. We have with us tonight Karen Lotto from Community Development as our resident expert, who can provide a little more, if nothing else, anecdotal context for what she's seen. So I'll see if Karen wouldn't mind talking for a moment. There we go.
Welcome, Ms. Lotto.
Thank you very much, Mayor Schul. Karen Lotto, Assistant Director of Community Development. And I really wanted to speak, and as Director Young said, really anecdotally to the issue of the impact of increasing the family size, which I believe is one of the concerns that Councilmember Freeman had articulated. Unfortunately, I do not have good data. I did some research to try to see if I could come across data on the impact of co-living and family size on housing prices, and I was not able to come across anything. What I can say is that in some ways, this is an example of undoing things that we have done. There used to not be a requirement on family size, and we used to have things like rooming houses and boarding houses that now in their modern incarnation are now called co-living arrangements or shared housing arrangements. And this is a missing part in our housing stock, certainly that we feel very much in the affordable arena. We have a great interest in the Community Development Department in supporting some of these shared housing arrangements to serve very low income people, including formerly homeless people, folks living on disability income. And we've been very limited in our ability to do that because we currently, with the family size at 3, projects just don't work. They simply can't gain enough rent for it to be viable, even as an affordable housing product, for it to function, or especially as an affordable housing product for it to function. And so we see it from the affordable housing perspective that it would be valuable to have the ability to do a larger number of people in a home as a way of really replicating what used to exist and then was kind of zoned out of existence. I would also just make a point that one-person households constitute a very large portion of the Durham population. It's about 1/3 of all households in Durham are one-person households. I cannot say it because the census don't cut the data this way, what the proportion of low-income people is who are one-person households. I can say that when you look at the very low end of folks who are struggling with homelessness, that over 70% of our homeless households are one-person households. Or non-family households in general. So there is a need for a shared housing product. There is a concern in certain neighborhoods where there'll be demand that this will drive up prices because you could potentially make more money renting by bedroom than you could renting the entire home. And that's very much of an economic possibility. I think, as Mr. Harmon noted, or Mr. Anthony, that's probably already happening in a number of neighborhoods as well. It's just kind of masked under only 3 people on the lease. So it's a challenging issue to decide, but I would just note from an affordable housing perspective, this is something that we see as potentially a valuable tool. Thank you, Mayor Schul.
Thank you, Karen Lotto. I appreciate that because it highlights, I guess, what is concerning, and you do give very good context. I would like to note that without having any type of tenant rights or tenant associations, I'm not sure how this will impact folks on the lower end of the spectrum. I understand that based on the comment that I think it was Mr. Anthony made, that the increased occupancy will create, could create for landlords that were interested an opportunity to lower the cost. Is there anything in there that you think could drive in that direction? I guess is what I'm.
So yes, because what will happen is that what can happen is that even though the overall cost of the building is higher in some cases, the cost to an individual household is lower because you're now having more households in that building. The price is going to be possible, for everybody to live in highly desirable areas. No, those are places where the per unit cost, the co-living arrangement, especially if we get the luxury buildings, those are not going to be affordable. But those neighborhoods in their entirety are probably not affordable now. And they're certainly not trending affordable. So the question really becomes, in other neighborhoods, does this become a vehicle, or does this legitimize what is already happening? Because these arrangements already exist in a lot of neighborhoods, and in some ways allow tenants then at least the rights that currently exist under law because they are now legal. They're not at risk just by even reporting a violation. But it's Councilmember Freeman, it is a tension, and as I said, I don't have data to say is the benefit that outweigh the benefit of being able to house more people and lower the individual's cost. Even if it raises the overall revenue that the owner of the property makes, the individual cost is lower. Does that outweigh the pressure on prices? I don't think we have data on that. What I can say is that there is a growing focus on shared housing arrangements as a way of meeting the needs of very low-income households, particularly of one-person households, because we simply cannot afford to build the number of units that are going to be needed to if we think about them as studio or one bedrooms. This is never going to happen. So this is a way of providing decent quality housing at a price point that we otherwise can't reach.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, Ms. Lotto.
Thanks, sir.
Ms. Lotto, you didn't give us an opinion on the 5 versus 6 question. Do you have an opinion on the 5 versus 6 question? It looks staff is recommending, is supporting this. Do you have any thoughts you want to offer?
I would say simply from my very narrow vantage point of affordable housing, when there is sufficient space in the building to put 6 people, it will be economically more sustainable when you're trying to house very low income people to be able to do 6 rather than 5.
Thank you. All right. Other questions for staff or the applicant by members of the council? Okay, I have a few. I want to start by thanking the Planning Commission committee that worked with the staff and the applicant to come up with a mutually agreeable solution to most of these issues. We do have the 2 outstanding issues here, but I do want to just appreciate that you all were really able to come together on most of the issues that are before us, and I thank you for that. Because I know that this started out as quite a, there's a lot in here. This covers a big piece of ground. I also want to appreciate the applicant for withdrawing the proposals for reducing tree coverage in open space. I understand that this proposal and the proposals here are all motivated by the applicant's intention to further reduce the cost of housing in Durham and to try to create a truly low-cost product, which is laudable and important. But as Mr. Anthony knows, when we first began talking, I made clear from the get-go that I believe that open spaces and trees are critical to the quality of life we want for all of our residents, and we can't compromise on that. So I appreciate the fact that those are no longer in this proposal, and I think what we have before us is absolutely excellent, and we are down to these two remaining issues. The two areas where the applicant and the Planning Commission majority differ, as we've been discussing: one, the elimination of the parking requirement, and the two is the applicant's proposal that the number be allowed to live in one house from 3 to 6, while the committee prefers this to rise from 3 to 5. So let me ask if the staff on page 4 of the memo states his preference for the applicant's position about the parking requirement. Can we hear a little bit more from the staff on that?
Sorry, trying to unmute. Always seems to be a problem. It's been well documented, and council has over the years removed the impediment of mandatory minimum parking requirements for affordable housing units. It started with the compact neighborhood tier, and then it slowly expanded to the urban tier, and then the request that Mr. Anthony brought forward for just including it also in the suburban tier seemed reasonable, because it's really focusing on those affordable housing units as defined in the UDO. We're not talking about somebody just claiming up it's an affordable unit, I don't have to provide any parking. Parking is a cost factor in development, and Karen can correct me if I'm wrong, but I know that they struggle with state-funded projects of getting parking requirements reduced even for those two, to reduce the costs for parking. They take a lot of money, and they take up a lot of space that could otherwise go for units. So the concerns that were raised, not quite sure understanding the concerns that were raised by the Planning Commission for not allowing it to just extend into suburban tier. We did suggest that if you wanted some sort of compromise, that projects that were located within a quarter or a half mile of mass transit stops would be a reasonable compromise. If there was some concern of a subsidized affordable housing unit that was placed somewhere away from mass transit, I can't think of that ever happening. There hasn't been one that I'm aware of. We don't get that many anyway, and they're usually located more in the urban or downtown locations. But that's generally our stance.
Thank you, Mr. Stock. I see Mr. Miller has his hand up. Mr. Miller, would you like to comment on this item, on this aspect of this item?
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I can tell you our concern is not whether or not projects that include affordable housing have reduced parking. No one objected to that. It was as written, the proposal would allow a developer to reduce the parking or eliminate the parking requirement for the affordable units while providing parking for the market units. That's what we objected to. And now, if there was a way to rewrite this provision to say that an overall reduction was allowed, but that you couldn't discriminate against the affordable units by eliminating their parking or treating their parking rights differently than the market units. If you could fix it that way, I believe everybody on the committee and the Planning Commission would have supported it. And I'm aware of projects that do include more affordable units, even if they don't meet the definition necessarily of affordability in Durham in the urban tier, where in fact one of the economies achieved for affordability for those units is that they have no parking, while market rate units in the same project do have parking. And while that might be practical in the urban tier, where there is usually pretty ready access to public transit, in the suburban tier, we were afraid that you would wind up with people who would be essentially could have no parking and would either wind up parking their car somewhere away or essentially be in constant conflict with management of the project over parking where they wouldn't park. And this thing does happen. I experienced it in my professional career as an advocate for housing consumers with the Attorney General's office.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. As I understand this conversation, Mr. Miller and Mr. Anthony are actually in substantial agreement on this. It seems like more of a wording issue than it does. As I understood you, Mr. Anthony, you said that
I endorse what Tom just said.
that you were in favor of having that the parking spaces would be available to everyone,
Yes.
whether or not they were in the affordable units or in the market rate units. And as I understood Mr. Miller, he is also in favor of that.
We are good to go.
And
We're
just-
not good to go because I think there's some concern about the wording.
Yes.
Right. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, that's exactly right. And because the work of this committee was COVID caught, we ran out of time to do wordsmithing. And if there were a way to add that language either now or at some point in the future, I know that the heartburn associated with this would completely go away.
Thank you. Well, this has been helpful. I'm going to, Ms. Lotto.
Yes, sir. It's a temporary measure. I did want to note that this applies to units that meet the affordable housing definition in the UDO. Typically, that is going to be units that are proposing to use the affordable housing density bonus. Those units, in order to use the affordable housing density bonus, will have to execute a contract with the Community Development Department, and we will not allow for parking discrimination or any other access, any other discrimination in access to amenities in any projects that are using the bonus. I recognize that doesn't cover the universe of cases, but it does cover the ones that are coming through right now.
Thank you. That's very helpful. All right, colleagues, I'm going to let us all cogitate on that one for a little bit. I think we have a lot of unity if we can get the language right. So why don't we move now to, if there are any questions on the, especially on the, well, any other questions at all, especially on the 5 versus 6 people, or any other concerns that colleagues want to raise. I'm not trying to limit your questions. Any other questions at this point? All right, I think we've had a lot of good discussion. Ms. Young, could you pop up on the screen here? Thank you. I think that the council needs to make a decision on the 5 versus 6. I think we've heard on that. I mean, I understand that a proposal has been floated that we allow only 5.5 people, but that doesn't seem to be that wise. But we do have here, sorry, Mayor Pro Tem. She gave me the chop. You know, the later it gets, the worse my joke gets.
I was chopping an imaginary person in half so that, so that we could max out the number of people.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's what we'll do.
Bad idea.
Mr. Mayor, the lateness of the hour does nothing for your sense of humor. That's not.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. Ms. Young, I think you heard Mr. Anthony and Mr. Miller have substantial agreement if we can get the wording right. Do you have any suggestions?
In terms of the wording for the parking?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can clarify that, and this is actually our practice and probably something that we should clarify across the board, which is that parking in terms of UDO calculations is not assigned. So anytime that we allow folks through the existing measures to reduce their parking by not having to provide parking for affordable units, we already do not assign it. So we can clarify that generically, but I can tell you that it's my interpretation as the planning director that that is how it functionally works.
Okay.
So if you're comfortable with that moving forward, I would suggest that we proceed, and then in a future omnibus, for clarity's sake, we can make that clear. But that's
right.
The longstanding interpretation of the application of that.
All right, that's helpful, and I bet you Mr. Miller will hold you to that should we pass this tonight. Would that come back during Mike Stock?
Yes.
Okay, great. Colleagues, any more questions or comments for staff?
Just one. I just want to know if a review of, I guess, those units that were mentioned earlier would also come before Mike Stock or come in with Mike Stock. But there was a note, I made a note that apparently there were some that weren't, I guess, that are not currently fitting in. And if that was known, I wanted to know if this was something we were tracking.
Could I get clarity on that one? I'm still missing.
Explain a little bit more, council member.
Sorry, are we tracking family units and any planning or zoning or community development or any other department? So where would that even be?
So I will say that this is one of the most challenging aspects of applying a rule like this, which causes us a lot of difficulty from a zoning enforcement standpoint. I will say that professionally, I do not think we need to be in the business of tracking family units as a planning department.
And with that said, I think I'm leaning more towards the 6. I want to be clear.
Thank you, council member. Okay. Colleagues, thank you. If there are no more questions, I will declare this public hearing closed. I'm going to make sure that I'm sorry, Councilmember Middleton, I did it again. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. I actually just wanted I also am leaning more towards 6 as well. I wanted to just give a word of commendation. I was pretty excited when this was first presented to me. Mr. Anthony, this notion of kind of codifying the dormitory approach and communal living. Black and Latino folk have been doing this for years. We've been having extended family under one roof for generations. This is how we got over. Shout out to Asian families who do it as well. So I think this is a wonderful way that many of our people have survived through the years unofficially. It's good to see it coming into the light and being codified. So certainly whatever wordsmithing we need to do, we'll do. But I am excited about this proposition, actually, this initiative. And I'm leaning more towards 6 as well. That's how we grew up. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Let me see if I can try to define where we are with some help from Ms. Young. Ms. Young, the proposal we have before us includes the parking language that we've discussed, and it includes the 6 people as the limit. If we vote for this, we're voting for the 6-person limit. Is that correct?
Going to jump in?
Go ahead, Mike. I think
I'm sorry.
That's
Mr.
okay.
Scott.
That's okay. That's okay.
2 options, right, Mike?
So option C1, which is the applicant's version, would cover everything that the Planning Commission recommended, plus it includes the parking, eliminating the minimum parking requirement, and includes 6.
That's C1. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. Now look at the motion. I understand it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And C2 doesn't include the parking requirements and includes 5. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. Okay, thank you. Colleagues, any more comments before we, Councilmember Freeman?
Just really quickly, I just wanted to hear from Karen Lotto if there was any thought she had about maybe setting up a resource, I guess, around making sure that folks weren't. I know that the housing discrimination, I think office sits in NIS.
Yes, right.
Or fair housing. And I just wanted to make sure that there was resources that could line up, or if there aren't any resources, if we need to line up resources to make sure that if there is someone who's been pushed out of a unit because they're not at, or what have you, like some way to make sure that there's going to be a gap in there of when we were, or when we have 6 and when we don't have 6, and just making sure that there's some overlay in preventing anyone from losing their housing. That's all.
So thank you, Karen Lotto, Community Development. there are limits to what we can do. If rents rise and an individual can't afford to pay the rent, unless they're able to get some kind of rental assistance from a voucher, then there's not a mechanism legally that we can prevent that person from having to move out. What we can do and what we would do is to channel resources into using this mechanism to create affordable housing opportunities, the income restricted affordable shared housing opportunities. And I believe, but would need to confirm, that most rental assistance programs allow you to use a voucher in this situation. I know that Mr. Scott from the Durham Housing Authority is on a later item, and he might be able to clarify that with regards to housing choice vouchers. So that would be another way that this would create, because one of the challenges we have right now, for example, in housing folks through our rapid rehousing programs, is finding affordable units to put them into. This would potentially expand, because even though the overall, all 6 bedrooms or all 5 bedrooms collectively might cost way too much, 1 bedroom would be affordable or could be affordable. And it would give us a kind of more places to put our 1-person households, and ideally higher quality units if they're well developed and well maintained. But I can't guarantee that those are going to be adequate to address all of the concerns that you have, because this is a market economy, and owners of property can make decisions about what they do with their property.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and steering me in that direction will probably be better than trying to put a restriction in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. All right, colleagues, any more questions or comments? Councilmember Caballero.
Yeah, are we just going to put up the one? Are you just going to ask for a motion for C1 and leave C2 alone? I'm just asking for clarity, because that's the one I want.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to ask for first, because I sort of sense that's where we're going. But I first want to just make sure. I have one comment, and anybody else have any comments?
Just that I'm excited. I'm glad that we're moving towards the 6, and I'm in full support.
Thank you. What I would say just in general is appreciating Mr. Anthony bringing this forward. Appreciate the Planning Commission, all the work that you all did to improve it. And the thing that I really have appreciated from community development, from Mr. Johnson, Ms. Lotto, and others over the last few years, saying to us again and again, we're not going to solve the affordable housing crisis by building subsidized housing by itself. We got to do a lot of that, but we have to work on these market-driven structures as well. And this is another step in that direction, as Mr. Harmon said, and I agree. All right, and with that, the first motion would be to adopt the appropriate consistency statement. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Freeman, seconded by Councilmember Freelon. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schul.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero.
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon.
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton.
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it, and the motion passes 7-0. I will now, for the second motion, if we adopt Ordinance C1, amending the UDO, we would include the parking language that Mr. Anthony has proposed, as well as the 6-person limit. Let me just add that this is with the understanding that the planning department would come back to us during Mike Stock with the appropriate language to clarify that all parking, any development, market rate or affordable is shared. So can I have a motion to adopt Ordinance C1?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem, seconded by Councilmember Reese. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schul.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero,
Councilmember Caballero?
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon,
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton,
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it, and the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you for Mr. Anthony. Thank you, Mr. Miller, Mr. Harmon. Thank you all for being here tonight on what I think is a very important and complicated issue. And I want to express my and the council's appreciation for all you've done. And thank you for the planning staff and Ms. Lotto as well. All right, we'll now move to item 24, approval of a multifamily housing facility known as Oakley Square Apartments. And first we'll hear from staff, and I see Mr. Johnson is with us.
Greetings, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, members of council, Reginald Johnson, Director of Department of Community Development. This item is a public hearing that we're asking for the approval of multifamily housing revenue bonds for the Durham Housing Authority for Oakley Square. This is not an item that will have any financial implication to the city, but the RS code requires that the municipality approve the Durham Housing Authority to issue these revenue bonds. And so what we're presenting before the council is the resolution to providing for the approval of the bonds for the Oakley Square and the financing of the revenue bonds. And Mr. Anthony Scott, CEO of the Durham Housing Authority, and Ray Parks, the consultant, are both on the call.
Thank you very much, Mr. Johnson. Colleagues, you have heard the report from staff, and I'm now going to declare this public hearing open, and I'm going to ask if there are any questions for staff by members of the council. Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. Just quickly, the bond council is not in place, or I'm not sure how to call it. The Affordable Housing Committee is not in place yet. Did they, is this a bond that they would have reviewed?
No, ma'am, this would not come before the Affordable Housing Implementation Committee.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, council member. Any other questions for Mr. Johnson? I don't see anyone here to speak on this item, so I'm going to declare this public hearing closed, and the matter is before the council. We are being asked to adopt a resolution providing approval of a multifamily housing facility known as Oakley Square Apartments. We'll start with that. We'll do this in two motions. Do I have a motion that we approve to adopt the resolution providing the approval?
So moved.
I'm sorry, who was that? Councilmember Caballero?
Second.
And seconded by Mayor Pro Tem Johnson. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schewel,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero,
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon,
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton,
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. We'll now move to approve the financing thereof with multifamily housing revenue bonds in an aggregate amount not to exceed $12 million. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Freeman, seconded by Councilmember Freelon to approve the financing. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mayor Schewel,
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson,
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero,
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon,
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman,
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton,
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. All right, we'll now move to item 25, which is the last item on our agenda. This is the approval of a multifamily housing facility known as J.J. Henderson Towers. And I will now ask for a report from staff. Welcome again, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Likewise, this is also multifamily housing bonds, not to exceed $15.4 million for JJ Henderson Towers. This is a RAD conversion project. And again, the city is being asked to approve this because of the IRS tax code. That's the reason it's being presented before you, and we recommend approval of this item.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Colleagues, you have heard the report from staff, and I'm first going to ask if there are any questions for staff by members of the council. Councilmember Freeman.
Thank you. I actually had a question come in from a member in the community, and I just wanted to make sure I verified the way that these bonds are set up are for projects that will go through the Durham Housing Authority. And I guess those projects would be like, I guess, RFQ'd or RFP through the Durham Housing Authority, not through the city. I just want to make sure.
That is correct, Councilmember Freeman. These do not come through these bonds do not come through the city.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, Mr. Johnson. Before we hear from the speakers, are there any other questions from council members for staff? All right, we have two speakers here with us tonight. Ajax Woolley.
Mr. Mayor,
I'm sorry.
This is a public hearing.
Yes, it is.
Yes.
Did I miss saying that?
Yes.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Johnson. Thank you for reminding me.
Yes,
I will now declare this public hearing open. Thank you. And we will now hear from our speakers, Ajax Woolley and Heather Ladd. And I want to thank you all for hanging with us past 10 o'clock, and grateful for you all for still being with us. Madam Clerk, can you make Ajax Woolley and Heather Ladd available to be heard?
They are, Mr. Mayor.
All right. We'll first start with Ajax Woolley, and you have 3 minutes, and if you need more than that, we'll figure that out. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of City Council and staff. On the eve of this historic election, I want to personally thank you all for your commitments to public life and your continual devotion to hearing all of our divergent voices in these strange remote rooms. And I hope we will all stand together in person again one day soon. It's been great to see each of you out in the community at Blast and Can and other public events that are very important to me personally. The agenda item before you is just one mechanical step in a long and laborious process that's intended to eventually lead to the betterment of housing for vulnerable citizens who largely rely on the collective conscience of DHA and city leaders to do the very best thing where their future housing outcomes are concerned. And this is especially true during a complex redevelopment project that includes relocation. Durham Can submitted written public comments in opposition to this item to the work session leading to this council meeting, and I won't reiterate those, but I'm personally curious whether council has considered those comments prior to this vote, and if you and staff will soon respond to the questions that were contained in that document. My own volunteer organizing work is very boots on the ground with DHA resident leaders, and it yields many stories that can provoke a strong emotional response, but tonight I will simply state a few facts for your contemplation. And I'm happy to be publicly corrected if we know of any of these facts to be untrue. At present, DHA does not have an acting director of development since the recent departure of Ms. Meredith Day. As Councilmember Freeman stated or queried, the Affordable Housing Implementation Committee is still not completely formed because it still lacks the required participation by another 2 DHA resident leaders. And the fact that they don't need to review this item is less relevant than the fact that they have not been found among the many qualified, brilliant, committed resident leaders in the communities. By my observation and by consistent reporting of residents at the Hoover Road Apartments, the DHA property manager listed for JJ Henderson during this transitional period has in fact been situated more or less full-time at Hoover Road Community since around June when a roofing replacement project first began there. and key residents at Hoover Road report feeling deeply disrespected and mistreated by that property manager since she arrived. Prior to her arrival, there was no on-site property manager at Hoover Road for several months. These details are uncontroversial clues about the current internal state of affairs at DHA and a brief firsthand account of organizing by the Durham Can housing team. And I offer them in the hopes of increasing the council's curiosity about the readiness of this crucial entity, meaning DHA, to both interface with the community and successfully manage residents' individual outcomes here at the outset of a period of intense change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Woolley. Appreciate your comments. And I will have some comments about them, but first would appreciate hearing from Ms. Ladd. Ms. Ladd, are you available to be heard?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. You also have 3 minutes, and if you need more than that, we can talk about it.
Okay, no, I think 3 minutes is more than enough. Thank you, Mayor Schul, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, and council members. My name is Heather Ladd, and I'm a member of Durham Can. And I'm speaking tonight as an opponent to this item to call attention to some of the problems that I've seen with the Durham Housing Authority over the last year, and including one, the lack of transparency with respect to its plans to convert DHA's public housing communities into privately managed ones, and number two, maintenance issues going unaddressed until they're taken up by the news media. So in September, we provided written comments for the significant amendments to DHA's annual plan and spoke at the public hearing that was announced on their website. Unknown to us at the time, though, there was also a public hearing being held regarding the sale of J.J. Henderson. We didn't know because the hearing wasn't published on their website and no agenda was published prior to the hearing. During the hearing, I made a request for documents related to the sale and conversion. But despite not receiving those documents several weeks later, that request was passed along as a memo for this agenda item with the appearance that our document request had been resolved when it had not. We have since received documents, and I want to thank Ms. Ashanti Brown of DHA for sending them and also for responding to our written comments. And we've also been assured that DHA will work on increasing their transparency. However, I feel that what happened is emblematic of the larger problems with DHA. It shouldn't take the news media to get infestations in people's homes dealt with, and residents shouldn't have to wait months for doors and exterior lights to be fixed, especially given the rise in violence. Mold should be eradicated, not painted over. Public hearings should be announced, and comments at public hearings should not be written off as resolved if they weren't. So I'd like to ask that agenda items related to DHA, especially future items that will provide the affordable housing bond money to DHA for redevelopment, be tied to a set of city designated benchmarks around transparency and quality of life standards for the families that currently reside in DHA communities. And I also look forward to receiving your comments or your responses to our written comments that we submitted. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ladd. We appreciate you being here. I think that I'll ask if Mr. Anthony Scott is with us. I believe he is. Mr. Scott with us? Hi, Mr. Scott. Welcome. Mr. Scott, would you like to respond to some of the comments that you've heard?
Yes, I can respond to a few. I believe Mr. Woolley mentioned that there was no director of development, and that was true. Ms. Day left, I believe, in August, or maybe, yeah, I believe in August, and so we immediately advertised for a replacement for that position. That position, in fact, has been filled. The gentleman was intended to start today, but he had a family emergency, so he was not able to. But he should be able to start this week. Mentioning about a manager at Hoover Road, again, employee left left our employ, and we have advertised for a replacement manager. We have not found an adequate replacement as of yet, but that position was immediately advertised for, and we are looking to get a replacement as soon as possible. But of course, we're looking to hire qualified staff to do so. And I believe Ms. Ladd spoke about transparency. As various things have come to our attention in terms of saying how we could be more transparent, we are certainly doing our best to do so. She spoke about the advertisement not being on our website. We follow the normal process we follow for these types of transactions, because this is not a normal RAD deal in terms of the bond aspect of this. So typically what we do is we are required by law to advertise in a newspaper. That's what we did. And it was more of an oversight in terms of thinking of something that needed to be specifically put on our website, because we just hadn't done that in the past. But in light of these being DHA specific properties versus like the Oakley Square project, which is not really one that belongs to DHA, we certainly will make sure that we do that going forward, which is something that we expressed to Durham can. And obviously the maintenance issues, we are working very hard on trying to resolve those issues. And no, we don't need media to address those things, but we are asking, just as we've asked CAN, is to continue to make us aware of issues that arise that we haven't been able to address adequately, so that we can get to those, particularly in light of the current state of things with the pandemic. But it is not our intent that we really need to have these sort of interactions in order for us to be able to address things. We want this to be much more regularly dealt with, and there are a number of changes that are being employed to make sure that on a regular basis we can do a better job with our maintenance. And that is something that we have been discussing with our board, for example, and you'll see a lot more efforts around that in the coming months in terms of talking about what we're doing, so it's more publicly known exactly what is occurring behind the scenes, which isn't so evident on the surface. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. I'll comment just very briefly, Ms. Ladd and Mr. Woolley, thank you for your comments. And I did receive your written comments and have not had a chance to respond yet, but I will sometime in the near future. And before tonight's over, I'll have a couple of comments about them as well. All right. Is there anyone, there's nobody else here to speak, so this will be the only two. So now, council colleagues, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you everyone for your words tonight. I just wanted to make a comment, which I'm kind of still formulating, and it's late, so I hope this makes sense. I feel like whenever we talk about public institutions like DHA or like Durham Public Schools, that we are, that our attitude toward public institutions is often related to, often comes back to this idea that we should benchmark performance in order to provide funding. And I've found that happen with lots of other, with lots of other conversations around public goods and public institutions. And I kind of just want to caution against that. I think that it's very important for DHA to meet the standards that we have for our community with regard to maintenance, and make sure that all of DHA residents have safe and healthy places to live. But I don't think the reason that they don't is because of failings by any particular person at the DHA, which would then be remedied if our funding was based on performance benchmarks. I think the reason that they haven't been able to keep housing up to the standard that we expect is because funding has been cut every single year for decades by the federal government. And so I kind of just wanted to bring that context into the conversation when we're talking about an institution that does not have the resources that they need to really do the things that we want. I'm concerned that the conversation turns then to that we somehow improve that institution by threatening to give them even fewer resources, which is not effective. What we need to do, which is what I think we're doing as a city, is to support the Durham Housing Authority, both with public funds and through public action. And that is the way that we improve housing in our city, improve quality of life for DHA residents, not by some threat of starvation, which we think will then somehow motivate people to do better. I think the folks at DHA are doing their absolute best with the resources that they have. And our goal should be to come together as a community to provide more resources and more support. And so I just wanted to make that point. Lots and lots of public institutions are in a position where they are really being abandoned by our federal government and are being put in the position where it is just more and more likely that they will not be able to meet the needs of the communities that they're trying to serve because of decisions that are being made at much higher levels than any of us are at. We need to do all we can to support the Durham Housing Authority and provide the resources that they need to adequately take care of their properties and residents. And that should be the way that we approach our interactions. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Rep. Pro Tem. Other comments? Other comments at this time? I don't want to miss a Councilmember Middleton like I have been if he wants to make a comment.
Okay, good. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually want to associate myself with the Mayor Pro Tem's comments, and first I want to thank my friends from Durham Can for the work they've done and for the heightened attention they brought to this issue. I think both things can be true at the same time. That we need to be diligent and double our efforts to make sure that our residents that live in public housing, here in the city, get the responsiveness that they need, and at the same time keep moving forward with the plans to retool and rethink what affordable housing or low-income housing looks like in our country. The conflation, I believe, of denying this this pro forma vote, really, it's a pro forma vote to allow them to move forward with this bond issuance, to conflate that with what we think is not going on or what should be going on at Durham Housing Authority, I think is not the conflation we want or we should be doing. If I might speak freely, I'm heartened by the number of people, present company excluded, who have spoken tonight in this council, but I'm heartened by the number of people that have in recent months discovered just how bad public housing is and how tough poverty is. And these issues have been festering and going on for generations. I grew up in public housing, so I know firsthand some of the struggles and challenges of it and the neglect that predates Anthony Scott, that predates this board. But I also understand the frustration, and I understand a little something about the culture of Durham Can as well. So I think that you're spot on to keep holding our feet to the fire, to keep insisting that we pay attention, not just pay attention, but do what we can as a municipality to make sure that the Durham Housing Authority has all it needs. But the Mayor Pro Tem is spot on, that there has been a systemic disinvestment in housing and public housing. We have a housing authority in Washington that looks at public housing with contempt. I mean, the people that are supposed to be most championing for these folk actually look at it as deficiency on your part, like there's something wrong with you if you need public housing. And that funding has, been contoured accordingly to that contempt and to that view. So I do not think that, again, and I'll put a period at the end of this. I do not think that conflating this particular vote tonight with the legitimate advocacy and spot-on concerns that Durham Can has about our brothers and sisters that live in these conditions is the conflation that would be the best way forward. But the advocacy needs to continue, and we also need to continue with our our long-term strategic plan of rethinking and really having a paradigmatic shift as to what public housing looks like and low-income housing looks like in our city. So thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Freelon.
Yes, I just had a quick question for Ajax and Heather. Thank you again for your advocacy and for being here, for the work you and Durham Can have been doing. I'm just kind of curious, in light of what Mayor Pro Tem Johnson and Councilmember Middleton have stated, I'm just kind of curious what accountability looks like to you. And I agree with their statements about withholding funds as maybe a counterintuitive, or not necessarily to conflate those two, but I wonder what other options are available to us as council members to aid and abet in your efforts to hold them accountable. And it sounds like you've kind of levied a bit of a charge that the media is a factor in your opinion. And I want to know, A, what accountability looks like to you, and B, what, if anything else, you think we could do beside withholding funds to achieve the goals that you'd like in terms of accountability for the things that you mentioned.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Woolley or Ms. Ladd, would either of you all like to comment?
I imagine we both would, but I'm happy to jump in for the sake of time.
Go ahead.
I think we're all smart enough to know that this is a pro forma vote, and we didn't imagine we'd be interrupting a funding source. I think that we need to take every opportunity to solicit the attention of council, to find ways to increase the bandwidth of this conversation until it includes the resident voices directly, which is not really practical in this forum. But it's also not happening through the internal mechanisms at DHA. And until that path does become smoother, I think you can expect us to honor your request to keep the pressure on and look for ways to amplify those voices. And it's really difficult right now. We understand that the pandemic makes it nearly impossible, but it also increases the urgency and the priority of that issue. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm sure Heather can do an even better job.
Thank you, Ms. Ladd.
Yeah, sure. I guess the first thing I'd like to say is just about, tying funding to benchmarks, as I said, and I guess I don't. I like the opposite situation in which you just hand over all the dollars and not expect, and not provide any kind of oversight is the opposite of that. And so I have to disagree that, you can't tie funding to certain requirements. And then the second thing I was going to say is that, these communities are in Durham, and Durham has minimum housing code. And, if you go through, Durham's housing code and you compare them to violations that they may receive from HUD through their REACT scores, you'll see that they're in violation of Durham's housing code. So we do have ways in which we could, and we have neighborhood improvement services that we could use to provide inspections. So I guess those would be the answers that I have to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Ladd. All right. I just have a couple of comments. Thank you all, Ms. Ladd and Mr. Woolley, and your commitment to these issues is fantastic. And to the people that you are working on behalf of and with, and whose voices you seek to amplify. I want to thank you for that. I hear what Mr. Woolley said about not really wanting to interrupt the flow of funds, I think. I'll just say for myself that when I received your comments, and that's certainly not the way I read it, you advocated that we not support this, and I took that at face value. I know you wouldn't want to deprive the people at J.J. Henderson Towers, who's, if we didn't do this renovation, would be, are already not in the shape we want them to be in, and would be in much worse shape. I know you wouldn't want to deny that. And so my suggestion is that, say what you mean, because what I thought you meant was that you were against this, and maybe you are. I'm a little confused about it, but we'd love to talk about that another time, just in terms of strategy and what you all are thinking. I'll just say, I thought what the Mayor Pro Tem said and what Councilmember Middleton amplified is so important. And I just really want to give those comments my full-throated endorsement. We certainly hold the Durham Housing Authority, when we funded a lot of Durham Housing Authority projects. Daymar Court and Maureen Road wouldn't have been renovated. They'd be looking like Hoover Road if it wasn't for what the city has done. We provided funding for that and provided oversight as part of that. The same is true and will be true anytime that the city provides funding. We have lots of oversight from the Community Development Department, work very closely with the Housing Authority. So I want to be clear about that. The other thing I want to say is this. I really believe in the staff in our Housing Authority and Mr. Scott, that they are really changing not only the culture at the Housing Authority, but they are, in 5 years, we are going to have so many more of our Housing Authority residents housed in good housing than we have now, through the bond issue, through the Housing Authority's plans, and they're driving that as hard as they can. And the fact that we have the tax credits now for the additional housing, additional units at J.J. Henderson, the fact that we have the 9% credit now for one of the downtown developments, these are crucial to the future of affordable housing in our city. And without them, and without the work that the Housing Authority has driven forward to make that happen, all of our affordable housing, all of our Housing Authority housing will be crumbling. We have to do that. And it's been very hard and very difficult. And I just want to say to my friends in Durham, CAN really deserves your support. I don't in any way ask you to take your foot off the gas in advocating for residents of Hoover Road and elsewhere. Keep doing it, it's super important. But I hope you'll also add your support to the Durham Housing Authority for the great things that they are doing, and there are many of them. Okay, those are my comments. Any other comments? Councilmember Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank all my colleagues for their remarks so far on this important issue, and especially just say how grateful I am to the folks who spoke tonight. I think what you're hearing from council members in response, I think, Councilmember Freelon really said it best, is that we really need to think about what accountability looks like for an organization like the Durham Housing Authority. And as my colleagues have said, I don't think accountability ought to look like cutting off money that the Housing Authority needs to do the work that it has to do in the community. And so I think we need to imagine together, both elected officials and the community need to imagine together what that looks like instead. During the time that McDougal Terrace was being renovated after the carbon monoxide scare and the other significant maintenance problems that were identified during that time, I had a number of Durham residents reach out to me and say, we shouldn't be giving DHA millions of dollars with no strings attached. They need to do X, Y, Z. yes, they definitely need to do X, Y, Z, but by golly, we got to get people back in their houses. I mean, we gotta pay to replace the stoves and the HVAC systems and pay for all the things that the city was supporting and funding during that time were absolutely essential. Emergencies. We pushed funding through in essentially a not transparent way because it was so important to do quickly. And those are things we all agreed were important. And so I don't think that the normal way that we hold organizations accountable can work in this context. And the Mayor Pro Tem brought it up, but I think our public schools are a great analogy. Do we, if cutting funding to our school system because our kids aren't learning as well as we want them to, or not, I guess that's what I should say is they're not achieving testing benchmarks that the state says are important. That's certainly an approach, but I don't think it's the right approach because that is our school system provides a public good that we need to cultivate and nurture and support. I think DHA is very similar in that way. Obviously, huge differences, but ultimately, we need to figure out together systems of accountability that continue to, because frankly, what Durham Can is advocating for in terms of, consistent staffing that treats residents with dignity and respect, basic maintenance repairs done at some time other than when a news camera shows infestations of insects. Those are things that all residents of the city of Durham deserve, including our residents of our public housing communities. We just need to figure out together how that accountability looks like in a world where there is no other organization in the world that will do what the Durham Housing Authority is doing for the city of Durham and for our people. And that's why we are supporting them more than just about any other city in America is supporting their housing authority. And we will continue to do that as long as I have a vote on this council. But we also absolutely positively need to hold them accountable for doing all the things that Durham Can is demanding, because those are all important. How we figure out, how we square that circle is something that I hope that we can imagine together. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Council Member. Council Member Freeman.
Thank you. I truly appreciate my colleagues noting all of the things that continue to kind of keep us moving in the right direction. I truly appreciate Mayor Pro Tem's comments and noting just how public goods and public services are critical to what we do and how we do it. I also want to note and just bring into the conversation that there does have to be a level of not just accountability, but just understanding that even with the deficits, it's almost like we're forced to do 3 times as much. And so noting that, the city knew going into the housing bonds that the Durham Housing Authority needed $544 million to actually complete the projects that they had on their list. And the bond was passed for $95 million. And we all acknowledged that as a community together. And I mean, the passage of the bond itself sent forward a mandate to note that it would be through incremental measure or incremental process that this would happen. So this is what incremental looks like. And unless we're going to figure out how to find the other millions to push more of the projects through and to actually get all of the housing up to a livable standard, we're all living in a community knowing that our neighbors and many of the housing authority locations face those pictures that we saw on Facebook or on the news, and it's uncomfortable. And so I really do appreciate Ajax and Heather and the Durham Can community for highlighting that, because that uncomfortable tension that we're all feeling is just the weight that we feel in knowing that our kids are unsafe, or it's just not what we want for our community. And I'm okay with that. But I do appreciate my colleagues acknowledging that we can do better and we can do more, and how we'll do more is what we're looking at. And so I do want to say that I know that the Director Scott has been making a lot of shifts and changes, and he has a plan, which I do support. I just don't see how we're going to get there, which is the hard part. And I'm more cognizant of just what it is when it is your unit. So if it were my unit in that condition, the angst that I would feel and what the kids are facing and all. And so I just know that the human side of this conversation is what's making us uncomfortable, but the reality of the logistics of how much can we actually pour into this is limited. And so I just wanted to note that that just that additional point that we've got to do 3 times as much and with far less money. I appreciate the imagining, but I do want to hear, because I do know that there are units that I'm still concerned about what they look like and where they are in the process, and just how much, like a real number, to move us forward, especially in the deficit side of it. So yes, on the bonds and everything that we've done, but where are we in the plan for what was not included in that initial $544 million? So I thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. All right, colleagues, I'm now going to declare this public hearing closed, and the matter is back before the council. The action that we've been requested is to authorize the J.J. Henderson Towers multifamily housing project in bonds in an aggregate amount not to exceed $15.4 million.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councilmember Reese, seconded by Councilmember Caballero. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
That wasn't me.
It's okay.
What did I say? You wait a minute. What did I say wrong?
You said Caballero, but it was me that did the second.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Johnson. Sorry.
Okay.
Madam Clerk, were you calling the roll?
Sure. Mayor Schul.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Johnson.
Aye.
Councilmember Caballero.
Aye.
Councilmember Freelon.
Aye.
Councilmember Freeman.
Aye.
Councilmember Middleton.
I vote aye.
Councilmember Reese.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. The ayes have it. The motion passes unanimously. Colleagues, thank you for your dedication tonight. It was a long night. We did a lot of work, and I think we did a lot of good work. And I just was, sometimes I just want to tell you all how much I was sitting here thinking how much I appreciated each of you and all the wisdom that you all bring to this individually. And I think we did some good thinking tonight and had some great discussions. So thank you, colleagues. I will see you all on Thursday. Between now and Thursday, there are some events. There's something tomorrow that's happening. One of the problems with adjourning so late is that at 9 o'clock, I got to be out hitting some doors. So I'm going to eat something and go to bed. Colleagues, good to see you. I'm going to declare this meeting adjourned at 10:49 p.m.
One day more.
One day more.
One more dawn.
At the Bethesda Ruritan Center at 6:30 a.m. as the inside partisan poll observer. So I am going to bed
Got
right
all y'all beat. I'm going out with Carolina Federation at 5 in the morning.
Oh!
If anybody is still listening and goes to vote at Bethesda Ruritan, please don't think I'm being rude when I don't speak to you. I'm not allowed to talk.
I feel positively lazy with my 8:30 shift now.
Hey, I'm going at 9. You're better than
I'm on
me.
at noon.
I'm just going to work.
No, now we're talking.
Absolutely.
Bye, everybody.
Good night. Good night, y'all.